Chapter 677. As he spoke, Baoyin returned to his horse and leaped onto it. But before he could urge his horse to leave, the cloaked woman's voice rang out again. Yes, we misunderstood you. We are indeed being chased. Now that you have seen us, please swear to the longevity heaven that no matter who asks you, you will not say that you have seen us here. Then we will turn around and leave. How about it? Although he was sure that Yang Chendong and the other three were not here to stop him, but considering that the pursuers were not far away, would they betray him if they found him? If that was the case, how could he escape from the pursuers? No, this young master is not used to swearing. Yang Chendong shook his head and added casually, "All right, since there are pursuers behind us, why don't you leave quickly? Do you really want to stay here and let them catch up to you?" Yang Chendong was chasing them away, but the more he did so, the more the cloaked woman felt that something was wrong. "No, you have to swear. Otherwise, you will definitely betray us." Do you have a persecutory delusion?" Seeing that the cloaked woman was so persistent, Yang Chendong could not help but say, What do you mean by a persecutory delusion? What are you trying to say?" The cloaked woman's hearing was good, so she heard everything clearly. Because of this, she wanted to know more. This time, before Yang Chendong could answer, another rider came from the side of the small valley. The rider was the captain of the 1st Guard Squad, Xiao. When he was 10 meters away from Yang Chendong, he had already dismounted and saluted. "6th young master, there are 300 riders moving in our direction. Do you think we should move first?" "No need." Yang Chendong shook his head and looked at the cloaked woman and Baoyin. "This should be the pursuers. It has nothing to do with us. Just be careful." "Yes." Xiao saluted again and left on his horse. From a moment he appeared to the moment he left, it was as if he had never been here. But now, no one cared about Xiao's appearance. Baoyin, who had been smiling, finally showed a trace of nervousness. He looked at the cloaked woman and said, "Young miss, they have caught up. Let's leave this place first." "No, they haven't sworn an oath yet. If we leave now, they'll know where we went when they catch up with us." The cloaked woman shook her head stubbornly. Baoyin looked like she was in a difficult position. She then looked at Yang Chendong and said, "Mister, I can tell that you are a good person. Why don't you make an oath? After all, you won't lose anything. What do you think?" "Oh, is this a good person card?" Yang Chendong smiled and shook his head. "The young master has said that I don't like to make oaths. So, don't even think about it. Let me give you a piece of advice. Leave immediately. Otherwise, you won't have another chance." "Yes, we won't have another chance," the cloaked woman suddenly said as she looked at the stream in front of her. Following the direction she was looking at, they could clearly see that the water in the stream was rippling. This was the tremor caused by the arrival of a large group of war horses. Everyone had been around horses since they were young. The Mongolians were known as the people who lived on horseback. They knew a lot about horses. Naturally, they knew that when there was a tremor on the ground, the distance between the two parties was very close. Perhaps they could still leave now, but Yang Chendong did not promise not to reveal their whereabouts. So, if they escaped now, as long as they chased in the right direction, it would be easy to catch up with them. Since that was the case, they might as well not leave. After all, the other party did not have the intention to kill them. They just wanted to capture them. As for Yang Chendong and the other three, they did not sell their horses first and did not promise not to reveal their whereabouts. Based on these 2 points, they should be punished. In an instant, the cloaked woman seemed to have thought of many things. Then, she suddenly got off her horse and walked towards Yang Chendong under the umbrella. As she walked, the woman took off the cloak on her head. When she walked in front of Yang Chendong, her appearance was completely revealed to everyone. This was a woman with an oval face. Her eyes were very big, her nose was very high, and her mouth was as small as a cherry. Her skin was very white. It was unknown how she took care of her skin. She did not get tanned even after riding on horseback every day. Of course, what caught Yang Chendong and the men's attention the most was that the woman's breasts were very high, which also became her biggest feature. When everyone looked at her, they couldn't help but look there first. Yang Shandong was no exception. He had seen many women in his previous life, but she was definitely the first one with such a huge chest. It was so big that it was a little unbalanced. Yang Shandong thought maliciously. Would he fall down while riding on his horse? At this moment, the girl had already arrived in front of Yang Shandong. Seeing that his gaze was fixated on her, she couldn't help but let out a prideful laugh. She shook her head, and her long black hair fell down her neck. She didn't stand on ceremony and sat down beside Yang Shandong. She even reached out for the exquisite teacup and poured the tea into her mouth. The woman was so open that Yang Shandong finally retracted his gaze. Hey, I said that's my teacup. I didn't dislike you. What are you yelling for? The woman pouted. She didn't even say anything. How could a man like you have the nerve to yell here? Yang Shandong, who wanted to say something, could only swallow his words back into his stomach. He took out another teacup from under the table and drank by himself. When the woman saw that Yang Shandong was ignoring her, she wasn't angry. On the contrary, her eyes revealed a sly smile. She pointed at the large umbrella above her head. Hey, I say, you are really relaxed. There's a blanket on the ground, a large umbrella above your head, and you are drinking tea while looking at the scenery. You are really comfortable. But what are you looking at? There's nothing in front of you except for this small stream. There can't be any underground treasure here, right? The woman took the initiative to talk. Yang Shandong only glanced at her and ignored her as if she was invisible. A woman, a beautiful woman, could tolerate a man peeping at her. She also liked a man to act like a gentleman in front of her. She could even understand if there was a hint of lust in his eyes. However, being ignored by others was absolutely intolerable. Hey, I'm talking to you. Didn't you hear me? Do you know that the pursuers will be here soon? If they see me sitting so close to you, you'll be in trouble. The woman couldn't stand Yang Shandong ignoring her and finally couldn't help but speak her mind. Finally, Yang Shandong reacted. I know. Didn't you want to say that you will implicate me? But you've already done so. Why are you telling me now? Are you feeling guilty? You know. Seeing that the other party had already seen through her little scheme, the girl's eyes widened even more. But soon, she exclaimed, What do you mean by guilty conscience? This young lady wouldn't do that. I just want to tell you that if you sell that horse to me now, I will leave immediately. I promise I won't implicate you. How about it? Nothing much. Yang Shandong shook his head. I don't have any good points, but I am a man of my words. Since I said I won't sell it, then I won't sell it. You can give up now. You? Seeing that Yang Shandong wasn't moved by force or persuasion, the woman was so angry that she was at her wit's end. She simply turned her head and didn't look at him anymore. It was like a couple quarreling and giving each other a cold war. The difference was that the woman's lips were already curled up high. She had no problem hanging the oil jug up and down. On the contrary, Yang Shandong was still half squinting and half lying on the blanket. He looked very comfortable and didn't care about the woman's reaction at all. This made the woman even angrier. She turned her head away and didn't look in his direction. Beta Persei and the other three who were standing around could only shut their mouths tightly. They even deliberately suppressed the sound of their breathing, afraid that they would make a noise and provoke their master's displeasure. Clatter, clatter, clatter. In just a short while, the sound of horse hooves could be heard clearly. Then, after a cloud of dust, a group of 300 cavalrymen wearing foreign race clothes finally appeared in the middle of the ditch beside the small stream. Sigh. With a sigh, the woman put down the teacup in her hand. She knew that she would have to leave with these people in the end, and from now on, she would have no freedom. Thinking of this, she didn't know why she thanked Yang Shandong. Thank you for the tea. Although I don't know how to taste tea, it was very fragrant and delicious. After saying this, the woman began to put on her shoes and tidied up her clothes. She prepared to leave the blanket and stand up. The 300 cavalrymen noticed the woman and bowed in. Under the signal of the strong man at the front, they fanned out and surrounded Yang Shandong and the other 5. A shout sounded, Princess Toya, didn't you say that you were going to relieve yourself? You've walked for a few hundred li. It's going to take us a long time to find you. Princess? When Yang Shandong heard this title, He looked at the woman with a curious gaze. As far as he knew, the imperial daughter of this prairie was different from the imperial daughter of the great Ming dynasty, but at the very least, she was the daughter of a great Khan or Khan. No wonder he felt that this girl's every movement gave people a feeling of magnanimity. It turned out that she was someone with some status. Chapter 678. Princess Tua, you didn't look at the change in Yang Qindong's expression. At this moment, she had already finished tidying up and was walking down from the blanket. That's enough, Lumik. Since you've caught up to me, this princess will accept her fate. You don't need to point out anything here. Also, you know what kind of moral character you and your master have. These people were coincidentally encountered. This matter has nothing to do with them. Please let them go. I'll go back with you. Princess Tua, you didn't even turn her head. She only extended her hand and pointed below the large umbrella. After saying this, she very confidently walked towards her warhorse with large strides. At this moment, another voice just happened to ring in her ears. Bring everyone here back. HM. Princess Toya was about to mount her horse when she heard that she was going to bring everyone away. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Lumik. What? Didn't you hear what this princess said? I said, this matter has nothing to do with these 4 people. Apologies, Princess Toya. I don't take orders from you. Lumik replied expressionlessly. Soon after, when his gaze landed on Yang Qindong's group of 4, his eyes revealed a hint of bloodlust. I suspect that these 4 people are Biming spies. Capture them all. Spies. Princess Tuaya laughed involuntarily. Have you ever seen such a leisurely and affectionate spy? Lumik, don't think that I don't know. You're afraid that the news of me being kidnapped will be sent back to my father. Princess Tia, everyone says that you're the pearl of the grasslands. Not only are you beautiful, but you're also intelligent. It seems that this is indeed the case. Only, since you already know, why bother asking? Lumik's face finally showed some color. However, no matter how one looked at it, it still seemed like he was mocking her. When he looked at Yang Qindong's group of 4, his gaze even more playful. It seemed as if he was looking at these 4 people as if he was looking at dead people. Cough. Seeing Lumik and Tuoya speaking one after another and deciding their fates, Luoya coughed. From the beginning to the end, no one asked for his opinion. Yang Qindong finally coughed to represent his existence. Sure enough, this cough attracted everyone's attention. Yang Qindong then said slowly, let me explain. I just felt that the weather was good, so I came here to take a rest and breathe in the natural air. I'm really not a spy, so you must have misunderstood me. Of course, I'm not a talkative person. I've actually forgotten about what happened just now, so you guys can do what you need to do. Just pretend that I don't exist, all right? As he spoke, Yang Qindong shrugged his shoulders innocently. Then, he lay back down on the blanket and closed his eyes. It was as if he really couldn't see anything and just came out to take a breath of fresh air. Yang Qindong felt that he was already very low-key. Although he was very curious about Princess Toya's identity, Rum's background also piqued his interest. However, he really didn't plan to do anything now. Whether he was a friend or a foe, he had to investigate to find out. Before that, it would be best if he didn't make a move. However, he didn't know that his current attitude was a provocation in Rum's eyes. What do you mean by treating you like an invisible person? You're standing there alive, all right? Princess Toya looked at Yang Qindong's attitude, and her beautiful eyes widened again. She really couldn't understand. Is there something wrong with this young and handsome young master's brain? Do you think we're here for a gathering of friends? Who is Runk? He's a devil who kills without batting an eyelid. What you're doing is simply provoking him, all right? It'll lead to unforeseen and serious consequences. Or do you think you're very good at fighting? There's a total of 4 of you. Oh, there's only 5 people, including the ones who were in charge of guarding. It's a fool's dream if you want to fight against 300 cavalry. Princess Tia, who couldn't figure out whether Yang Qindong's brain was damaged, felt that the situation was a bit tricky. Rump was already provoked by Yang Qindong's disregard. In his eyes, this kind of provocation made him want to laugh out loud. This man dressed like a Han and dressed in green probably doesn't know who I am. I hope he'll still be able to laugh when I catch him and chop off his head. What are you still standing there for? Capture him. Kill anyone who resists. The infuriated Rumk issued his threat for the third time. The 300 cavalrymen behind him also felt their souls returning to their bodies. They were also confused by Yang Chendong's performance just now. They wondered how there could be such a reckless person in this world. Since the general had given the order, they naturally wouldn't be polite. Each of them mounted their war horses and began to shrink the encirclement, moving towards the umbrella. There were also a few cavalrymen who very straightforwardly put away their cavalry sabers and raised their arms. Their appearance was clearly telling the others to watch how he would capture someone alive with his bare hands. Rumk, you dare! Princess Tya obviously knew what was going to happen next. When she thought about how she was going to cause the deaths of 4 innocent people, she was so angry that her face turned completely red. However, shouting like this at this time naturally wouldn't have any effect. The 300 cavalrymen were all brought by Rumk. At this moment, they only listened to this one person's orders. The 4 dark-skinned cavalrymen were already itching to give a try, looking like they were going to charge over and capture someone in the next moment. As their opponent, Yang Chendong was still half lying on the blanket. He didn't even open his eyes, giving off the feeling that he had already accepted his fate. Right at this time, when the cavalrymen were about to make their move, a wave of earth trembling sounds suddenly sounded. The small stream's water began to ripple again. This movement also attracted Rump's attention. When he couldn't help but turn around to take a look, his expression immediately became extremely unsightly. Behind them, a group of cavalrymen stood impressively. They were uniformly dressed in pitch-black iron armor and wore unknown military green helmets on their heads. Below the helmets was a black iron mask that completely covered their faces, making it impossible for others to see their appearances. At the same time, a wave of austere aura flickered. What was even more frightening was that the war horses they sat on were actually completely covered in black iron. Even at the position of the horse's legs, only a small section was exposed. It was equivalent to almost completely wrapping and protecting the war horses, achieving the effect of absolute impenetrability. Who are you? Rump couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva as he asked. Even though they hadn't fought yet, his senses already told him that this was an extremely elite group of cavalrymen. Even though their numbers weren't as many as his own, if they really fought, he actually didn't even have a 50% chance of victory. In the Walla region, on the grasslands, when did such a heavily armed group of cavalrymen appear? Why didn't he have any information about them before? Could it be that Princess Tya brought them here for the sake of robbing and killing him? Thinking of this, he couldn't help but shift his gaze towards Tya. What he saw was a similar expression of shock. Suddenly, Rump thought of something and quickly turned his gaze towards Yang Chendong, who was under the large umbrella. Unfortunately, he was still half lying down and sleeping. There was nothing different about him at all. A huge question arose in his heart, but Rump also knew that this wasn't the time to ask questions. Since the enemy had appeared behind them, of course, they had to kill them first. Everyone, pay attention. Turn your horses around and prepare to charge. Whoosh! The 300 cavalrymen quickly turned their horses around and drew their sabers, preparing to charge. Charge! Kill! In the next moment, almost at the same time, both sides launched their attacks forward. At this moment, the battle cries disrupted the tranquility by the stream. At this moment, blood began to wreak havoc, and the pungent smell of blood permeated the originally fresh air. Yang Chendong also sat up. At this moment, he couldn't pretend to be asleep, and he couldn't treat everything with indifference. He wanted to see just how powerful this black armor that had cost a fortune to create was. He wanted to see just what kind of amazing battle results could be achieved in the hands of these fast-trained, battle-hardened, and highly skilled guards. Under Yang Chendong's gaze, the cavalrymen from both sides charged and engaged in a chaotic battle. Sabers, broadswords, and spears clashed against each other. From time to time, there would be cavalrymen falling from their horses. From time to time, there would be streams of blood spurting into the sky, and from time to time, there would be cries of pain. After carefully observing the battlefield for a moment, Yang Qindong's lips curled up. As far as the eye could see, all those who fell from their war horses were enemies. Until now, not a single guard had died in battle, and not even a single one had been injured. Of course, this didn't mean that they wouldn't be injured, but because the protection was too comprehensive, they didn't even need to think about defense when facing the enemy. They only needed to swing their sharp sabers and kill. Regardless of whether it was themselves or their horses, they had absolute protection. Unless the enemy's saber, sword, or even arrows could shoot into their mouths or eyes. But obviously, the guards' military quality was quite high, and they would never allow these key positions to become the enemy's target. After observing for a moment, Yang Qindong felt relieved. He had a deeper understanding of the warhorse armor, but it was a pity in his heart. The materials needed to create a warhorse armor like this were too much. If he could really have 10,000 cavalrymen like this, wouldn't he be able to sweep through the entire grassland without any opponents? After relaxing, he poured himself a cup of tea and said softly, "Good, the tea is still warm." While Yang Qindong was leisurely sipping his tea, more than half of the 300 enemies were dead or injured. Even if less than half of them were alive, most of them were injured. If not for their excellent horsemanship, they would have fallen from their horses by now. Chapter 679. On the battlefield, Lumake had already gone from the initial shock to the current powerlessness. Originally, he thought that with 300 against 100, even if the opponent's equipment was excellent, he would be able to exhaust them to death. But when he really fought, he realized that this was not a battle, but a beating. If he slashed the enemy would be fine. If the enemy slashed him, he would have to pay the price of serious injury or even death. This was simply an unfair battle. Seeing his brothers die one by one, and seeing the number of comrades around him decrease, Lumake had no choice but to make a decision, which was to leave the battlefield and leave this place. He would report what happened to the higher-ups, and then wait for an opportunity to take revenge. Everyone retreat. Their war horses are heavily armored, so they won't be as fast as us. After exchanging blows with another member of the security team, Lumake's long saber only managed to produce a series of sparks. Finally, Lumake gave up on the thought of continuing to kill the enemy. He turned around and retreated. Some of the cavalrymen who were very close to Lumake also followed suit and turned to flee. In order to avoid being shot by the arrows, they kept making all sorts of evasive maneuvers on their horses. From afar, they looked as agile as monkeys. Seeing that the enemy was about to escape, Beta Persei bowed and asked Yang Qindong for instructions. "Young master, don't worry about them. Let the team withdraw and sum up their combat experience." Yang Qindong naturally knew what Beta Persei meant. Now that Lumake was leaving, it was just as he had said. The members of the Iron Cloak Guards were clearly at a disadvantage in terms of speed. It was impossible to chase after them, and even arrows might not be able to reach them, unless they use guns now, but this might expose their identities. After all, an army with continuous fire guns would easily make people think that they were related to mercenaries. He dared to use it against the Beiming guards, because he believed that none of them would be able to escape. But now, he did not have the confidence to kill all of Lumake and the others. Since that was the case, he might as well let them go. Of course, if the other party wanted to take revenge because of this, he would eat as many as they came. He was never afraid of war. For example, many founding emperors had gone through countless battles and life-and-death situations to achieve success. But then, they would talk about using virtue to win people over and rule the country with literature. Yang Qindong was different from them. He started from nothing, and he relied on his powerful martial strength to achieve all of this. Therefore, he would not be like the other emperors and hide anything. So what if he established the country with martial prowess? Since the country was founded on martial prowess, why should they fear war? Right now, the 5-star army needed a baptism of war. So if there must be a storm, then let the storm come fiercely. That's right, Arrange for people to post the sentries further away. If the enemy makes any strange movements, immediately inform the surrounding troops to surround and eat them. After that, Yang Shindong picked up the teacup on the small table and drank it slowly. Yes. Beta Persei stood up straight and waved to the fully armed guards who were still waiting for orders. Immediately, more than 100 riders scattered in all directions, appearing and disappearing as mysteriously as when they first appeared. The difference was that when they left, they took away the captured war horses and the enemy's corpses. Hey, these are indeed your troops. Hey, who are you? My name is Narain Tia, and my father is Sud, the Khan of Mabe, Mongolia. This hand gesture was seen by the sharp-eyed Princess Tia. She immediately skipped back to the umbrella, taking off her riding boots and sitting down on the blanket without regard for anyone else. Princess Baoyin, who was accompanying her, saw that Tuya had exposed her identity and wanted to stop her. Unfortunately, it was too late, so he simply shut his mouth. Mabe, Mongolia. Yang Qindong listened to the introduction and nodded silently. In 1402, Northern Yuan was destroyed. After the Yuan dynasty was destroyed, Mongolia was divided into many tribes. Later, it gradually formed into 3 major tribes according to the area they lived in. The Mongols who were distributed in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region and the 3 northeastern provinces were called Mabe Mongolia, which was also known as Korkan tribe. The Mongols who were distributed in Xinjiang, Qinghai, and Gansu were called Mabe Mongolia, which was also known as Khalkha tribe. The Mongols who were distributed in Xinjiang, Qinghai, and Gansu were called Mabe Mongolia, which was also known as Uruk Mongolia. The territory of Mabe Mongolia should be between the Wala and Tatar tribes. This could also explain why Yang Qindong would coincidentally meet Princess Tuya here. I'm just a nobody, not worth mentioning. Yang Qindong casually waved his hand and had no intention of saying his name. Hey, you're so boring. I've already told you my name and identity, but you're not even willing to say your name. That's unreasonable. How about this? You tell me your name, and I'll tell you why Lumik is chasing me. How about it? Tuya looked angry at first, but when she saw that Yang Qindong was unmoved, she could only suppress her dissatisfaction and add another bargaining chip. Needless to say, Yang Qindong was really curious about Lumik's identity. He actually dared to make things difficult for Princess Tuya, the daughter of the Mabe Mongolian Khan. After thinking for a while, he thought that it was just a name, and he wouldn't lose anything. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll tell you. My name is Yang Dong." Yang Dong was Yang Qindong's name in his previous life, so it wasn't a lie. Yang Dong, I've never heard of you. Tuya first rested her chin on her hand and thought carefully. However, she didn't have any impression of him, so she simply didn't care so much. Instead, she laughed and said, "This Lumik, he's from Agar Dorji, right? You know this person, right?" I know. He's Tawachuo Buhua's younger brother from a different mother." Yang Qindong nodded. This information had been reported by the Security Bureau a long time ago. Speaking of which, this happened last year. Just like in history, the Walla's leader, Yeshen, and Tawachuo Buhua were known as monarch and minister, but only in name. Tawachuo Buhua's wife was Yeshen's sister. Yeshen wanted to make his sister's son the crown prince, but Tawachuo Buhua refused. Yeshen suspected that Tawachuo Buhua was secretly in cahoots with the Ming dynasty, which was disadvantageous to him. As a result, in the 12th month of the 2nd year of Jingtai, 1451, he attacked. In the end, Tawachuo Buhua was defeated because his younger brother, Agar Dorji, and Yeshen colluded and attacked from both sides. However, what was different from history was that they had just defeated Buhua. Before they could follow up on their victory, they suddenly had a conflict with Northern Ming. Then, both sides started fighting again. This gave Tawachuo Buhua a chance to recuperate. The most unfortunate of them all was his younger brother, Agar Dorji. Seeing that his brother was still alive and had turned against the Northern Ming Empire, Agar Dorji had no choice but to retreat with his cavalry out of fear that the Northern Ming Empire would seek revenge. Seeing that Yang Qindong said that he knew, Tuya did not suspect anything. After all, This was a big matter that anyone with a bit of status would know. She continued, Agar Dorji's strength is not bad. He has 50,000 cavalry. However, when there are many soldiers, he needs provisions and a base. After thinking about it, he set his sights on the Mongols of the Gobi Desert. His son, Hala Kutu, wants to marry me and form an alliance with the Gobi Desert Mongols through marriage. He wants to maintain the army's expenses and find opportunities to strengthen his own strength. It's just that Hala Kutu is too ugly. I don't like him. That's why even though Father Khan ordered me to go to their camp, I still managed to find a way to escape. What do you think? I'm smart, right? Tuoya said proudly, as if she had done something amazing. When Yang Qindong heard all of this, his face darkened. That, you don't want to marry him because he's ugly? That's part of it. Without noticing the change in Yang Qindong's expression, Tuoya continued, it's mainly because my father understood the purpose of Agar Dorji. It's not true that they want to marry us, but they want to take the opportunity to annex us. After saying this, she noticed Yang Qindong's darkened face. Tuoya couldn't help but ask anxiously, Hey, what do you mean? Are you saying that only you men can pursue beautiful things, and we women can't? Sure. Why can't we? If you say so, then so be it. Yang Qindong was not stupid enough to reason with a girl, especially when this person was from the Appearance Association. Seeing that Yang Qindong had admitted defeat, Tuoya raised her chin happily, like a proud peacock. However, this self-satisfaction did not last long. She said worriedly, You almost killed Lumik just now. Now that he has escaped, he will definitely come back for revenge. You should be from Baiming, right? You should hurry back. Although they are powerful, they won't dare to go to Baiming's territory to seek revenge. He could feel Tuoya's good intentions. In fact, although this woman was a bit unreasonable, she took the initiative to cut ties with him after Lumik appeared. She was not a bad person. Only then did Yang Qindong have the mood to smile and say to the other party, Why should I run? He was the one who took the initiative to find trouble with me. He wanted to kill me. I can't just stretch my neck and wait. Besides, they were defeated by me, so they should be afraid and won't come back. Ha ha ha. As if she heard a funny joke, Tuo, you shook her head. Young Master Yang, you don't understand them. Just now, the cavalry under your command did indeed display great battle prowess, but in the end, you only have 100 cavalry. Besides, this is not Baiming's territory, but the grasslands. It belongs to the Mongols and the Tartars. It would be strange if they let you go. I said before that they have 50,000 cavalry. Less than 200 of them died. It's not a big deal. 50,000 cavalry? Are they going to send all of them to deal with me? Yang Qindong pretended to be surprised. Chapter 680. That won't happen. Their main force is not around here. After all, this place is also our Khalkha tribe. If they send out their army without permission, it will cause a misunderstanding. But it is still possible for them to send 1,000 cavalry. No matter how powerful your cavalry is, it is still impossible for 100 to fight 1,000. Besides, your cavalry is not without weaknesses. Anyone can see that they are not fast enough. Once they are entangled in a battle of attrition, they will eventually lose. Tuoya's analysis made Yang Qindong nod his head. If the other party only sent 1,000 cavalry, then he had nothing to be afraid of. On the contrary, he could capture a large number of war horses. Wasn't this taking the initiative to give him a gift? Thinking of this, Yang Qindong simply laid down on the blanket again. Since that is the case, this young master will wait for them here. I want to see what they can do to me. Yang Qindong's casual manner naturally caused an anxious expression to appear on Tuoya's face. Why aren't you leaving? Hey, do you really think I am joking with you? After calling out a few times, she did not see any movement from Yang Qindong. The anxious Tuoya said to Bao Yin, who was standing behind her, Go, immediately inform my father and ask him to bring the army here. Princess. Bao Yin's face was filled with anxiety. Princess, you'd better return with me. Wouldn't it be better for you to tell Khan personally? I go back. If I go back, will my father still bring people here to rescue? All right, Go back alone and tell my father that if he does not send troops in time, he may never see his daughter again. Go. This is an order. Tuoya seemed to know that it was impossible to reason with Baoyin, so she simply gave the order as her mistress. Sure enough, as soon as Yang Chendong said that, although Baoyin still looked hesitant, she finally nodded. After glancing at Yang Chendong, she turned around and rode away quickly. Yang Er, who was watching from the side, couldn't help but secretly give Tuoya a thumbs up for her actions. This girl had some eyesight. She could see that his young master was not ordinary. It was a wise move to befriend him now. Of course, it would be even better if she could repay him with her body. Although Yang Chendong now had 5 wives and concubines, and Luan Xiaoyu, who was waiting to be married when she reached the age, he still did not have a single child. This not only made all the Yang Xie's senior officers anxious. It was always worrying to have no children, and they were also afraid that there would be no successor. However, as his subordinates, they really could not do anything. They could only hope that the young master had more women, which meant that there would be more opportunities. Seeing how big Tuoya's chest was, she should be able to give birth to children. Beta Persei was still discussing in his heart. Yang Chendong did not know about this. After seeing that Tuoya actually took the initiative to stay, he asked curiously, "Why aren't you leaving? Aren't you afraid that Lumek will bring his troops back? My cavalry won't be able to protect you. I was the one who brought the hatred. How can I leave? Do you think that we grassland women don't understand reason?" Tuoya rolled her eyes at Yang Chendong and said righteously. After saying this, her face unknowingly turned red, and she quickly lowered her head to hide it. Tuoya admitted that Yang Chendong gave her a good impression. This man was very handsome and so young. If she were to compare who would be a suitable husband, he would be much better than that ugly Hararuo. Of course, she stayed here because she was curious about the black-clad cavalry. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling that even if Lumek brought his troops here, it wouldn't be difficult for this handsome young master. In short, she was infected by Yang Chendong's strong confidence. Yang Chendong was speechless after seeing Tuoya's heroic side. He could only say, "All right, then let's wait a little longer. If the sun is about to set and the enemy doesn't appear, then we'll go our separate ways." After saying this, Yang Chendong took a sip of tea and closed his eyes again. Tuoya, who wasn't chased away, didn't care about this. Since she was able to stay, she used this opportunity to talk nonstop like a machine gun. She selectively told Yang Chendong some of the secrets of the grassland that she knew about. Although it was selective, some things were still kept secret to the outside world. This piqued the interest of the 6th young master, who had originally wanted to close his eyes and take a nap. After a while, the conversation between the two of them became more and more lively, as if they were old friends. Lumek fled in defeat. After running a certain distance, he saw that there were no invincible soldiers chasing after him. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. But then his face was filled with anger. He and his 300 cavalry couldn't even defeat the enemy's 100 cavalry. To him, this was absolutely intolerable. As a proud general, of course he wouldn't let this matter pass. He wanted revenge. "Let's go. Come with me to find the young master." Lumek whipped his horse and led the defeated cavalry to turn a corner and gallop away. His luck wasn't bad. He originally thought that he would have to run for 2 hours before finding Hararuo. He didn't expect that the young master was worried about Tuoya and had already chased after him with 5,000 cavalry. Hararuo had 5,000 cavalry. Even if they met the Mongolian cavalry of the Gobi Desert, they would be able to protect themselves. After all, neither side wanted a war of this scale. The answer was likely to be a mutual retreat. With this in mind, Hararuo wasn't too surprised when he saw Lumek appear with his defeated army. "What's wrong? Did you meet the main force of the Gobi Desert?" "Young master, I don't know if that's the case," Lumek said gloomily. It didn't matter if they lost the war. As long as they were still alive, they could always learn from the experience and fight again. But what he couldn't accept was that he didn't even know the enemy's background. "You don't know?" Hararuo's face turned ugly. He wanted to shout out trash, but when he thought about it, he suppressed his anger and asked, Tell me, what's going on? Yes, young master. The situation is like this. Lumek chased after Toya, but there was someone else with her, especially a handsome young man. Then, a group of unknown black cavalry appeared. Halaruo listened silently at first. When he heard that Tuaya was with a young man, his eyes became as deep as water. Although he only liked Tuaya for her beauty and wanted to use the marriage to find a place to develop, Tuaya was already like a piece of meat in his heart. How could he allow another man to taint her? Take me to him. I want to kill him. Hararuo roared. The murderous intent in his eyes was almost tangible. Beside a small stream, under a large umbrella, Yang Chendong drank the last cup of tea. His face was filled with satisfaction and regret. He was satisfied because of the leisure he had for half a day. Usually, when he was in the military camp, he would either read information or look at the sand table. Occasionally, when he had time to rest, he would exercise his body. When had he ever relaxed like today? Although he learned more about the situation when chatting with Princess Tia, time always passed quickly when chatting with a beauty. He didn't feel tired. Regretfully, Lumek didn't bring anyone to cause trouble for them. Originally, he wanted to wait for them to come and take the opportunity to obtain more war horses. Now, it seemed that he wouldn't be able to do as he wished. All right, the tea is finished, and the sun is about to set. I should also go back. Let's meet again, Princess Tuya. Yang Chendong sat up straight and stretched his waist. Beta Persei brought Bat Dao Jiang and his friends over and began to pack up the small table, large umbrella, and blankets. Tuya pouted and unwillingly got up to put on her shoes. Yang Chendong was about to leave. Lumek hadn't come, so he had no reason to stay here. After all, she was still a girl. She couldn't really stay here. Although the women of the steppe were much more magnanimous than the women of the Central Plains, as unmarried women, there was a limit to what they could do. Yang Chendong didn't know what Tuaya was thinking, but he really didn't want to incur any more emotional debt. Moreover, although Tuaya could be considered pretty, and her position was definitely a lethal weapon, she wasn't the type that would make people lose control of themselves at first sight. At the very least, she was far inferior to Hu Yan's gentleness, Xiao Yin's obedience, and Su Moner's seductive charm. Madame Shui and Madame Xiang also had their own merits. The former courtesan of the capital had many unique skills. Even Wan Xiaoyu, who wasn't even 18 yet, was as understanding as the little sister next door. She looked even more valiant and heroic in her military uniform. It could be said that people couldn't be compared to each other. Yang Chendong didn't mean this. Even though he knew that Tuaya had an extraordinary status, he didn't urge her to stay. How could a man rely on a woman and his pants to establish himself in the world? At this moment, even though he saw Tuaya's unhappy face, Yang Chendong didn't have any intention of changing his mind. He remained silent the entire time, watching Princess Tuaya walk in front of his warhorse with a face full of displeasure and reluctance. Report. Seeing that Tuaya had already lifted one of her feet and was about to get on her horse at any moment, First Guard Captain Xiao V appeared in front of him. With a loud shout, he broke the originally peaceful atmosphere. Xiao V didn't kneel, only saluting with his body stretched taut. He said, "The scouts report that there's a group of cavalry approaching us from the northwest. There are about 5,000 of them." 5,000 cavalry. A look of shock flashed across Yang Chendong's face. He had thought that Rumak would come for revenge, but he didn't expect so many cavalry. If he had been prepared, with the 15,000 cavalry in his hands, he naturally wouldn't be afraid of 5,000 infantrymen. But the enemy had come too suddenly. He didn't know how many cavalry he could mobilize in such a short time. Chapter 681. His gaze fell on Xiao V. Where are the various units? How many of them can we contact? Reporting to the 6th Young Master, the 3 divisions of the Coal Vanguard Division are currently undergoing long-distance training and cannot be contacted for the time being. The Independent Regiment is further away, and most of them are infantry. According to the location they reported earlier, they should be about 30 miles away from us. The 1st and 2nd Cavalry Regiments have already sent people to inform them. They are even further away from us, more than 100 miles away. I'm afraid that they will have to wait until dawn to arrive when they receive the news. Now, only the News and Cavalry Regiment and the Logistics Battalion are at the base camp. They will arrive in half an hour. Chiovi's body was covered in a layer of cold sweat as he reported. He wouldn't have known if he didn't say anything. After he finished, he realized that the young master's forces were actually so weak. The only force that could really come immediately was the News and Cavalry Regiment. Of course, in his eyes, the Logistics Battalion did not have the slightest bit of combat power. Beta Persei also heard it clearly from his side. He also felt that the situation was a little serious. He took the initiative to say, "Young Master, the Logistics Battalion can also go to the battlefield. No matter what, they have the strength of 1,000 people. Say no more." Yang Qindong waved his hand. Not only would he not let the Logistics Battalion go to the battlefield, he would not even return to the base camp. He did not know what the outcome of this battle would be. Once their main camp was destroyed, the army would have a hard time moving through the grasslands without rations. He could not take the risk. Yang Qindong looked at Qiu Vi and asked, "Is there any terrain nearby that is suitable for the cavalry to fight?" Qiu Vi did not understand what Yang Qindong meant, but since it was the young master who asked, he thought about it carefully and said, "There's a short stone pile about 5 miles away from here. It is densely covered in gravel and is not suitable for a large group of cavalry to fight." 5 miles. Yang Qindong only thought for a short, while before the location of the short rocks in the sand table appeared in his mind. He immediately nodded. "Okay, let's choose the battlefield there." At the same time, he sent out all the scouts on hand and asked them to contact the main forces, telling them to quickly approach the pile of short rocks and look for opportunities to fight. Also, inform Commander Yi La to bring the Nuzan Cavalry Division to reinforce us. In a very short period of time, Yang Qindong was ready to fight. However, as soon as he finished speaking, Beta Persei said anxiously, "Young Master, the Nuzan Cavalry is not a direct army. If the situation is unclear, I'm afraid they will. They'll betray us, won't they?" Yang Qindong finished for Beta Persei. Then, he sneered and said, "I believe that Yi La is not a short-sighted person. If he is, then sooner or later, he will rebel. Isn't it the best of both worlds to use this opportunity to test him? Okay, it's decided. Captain Xiao, you can go and pass down the order." Yang Qindong wouldn't tell anyone that he had the secret of the warehouse. If Yella really wanted to go against him and threaten him together with Lumek, then he wouldn't mind taking out some weapons from the warehouse that would give them a scare. For example, he could casually drive out an armored tank. That was a good thing that could even block bullets. What could those bows and arrows do? At that time, he would kill in all directions. He would turn the pile of short rocks into a pile of bones and a pile of blood. He sighed in his heart. "Yi La, you better not disappoint me. Otherwise, because of you, I'm afraid that no Nuzan will appear in this world in the future." Yang Qindong pursued the goal of achieving it by hook or by crook. He could give others a chance, but there was only one chance. If he couldn't seize it, then sorry, the next thing would be the power of thunder that would destroy the world. Qiuvi had followed Yang Qindong for a long time. Naturally, he could see the determination of the 6th young master. After saluting, he turned around and left. On the other side, Princess Ta also walked over at this time. "What's wrong? Did Lumek come again? Why don't you go northeast? I'm sure that Bao Yin has already told her father about me. There should be people coming to receive us." At that time, no matter how bold Rumak is, he won't dare to act rashly. Tuoyu was truly kind. Yang Qindong could feel it. However, as a man, how could he live under the protection of a woman? Besides, war was the reason he came to this place in the first place. Sometimes, as the war continued, there would be fewer and fewer people. When those who were unconvinced became corpses and those who were convinced were still alive, then it would be time to unify this place. Yang Qindong, who wouldn't back down and had no reason to do so, naturally rejected Tuoya's kind intentions. In return, he didn't let her leave this time. Instead, he said in an inviting tone, "Rumak is indeed coming." This time, he brought 5,000 cavalrymen with him. Why don't you come with me? It will be safer that way. Since the enemy cavalry was coming, they would definitely send out light cavalry scouts. Once they found out that Tuaya was alone, there was no telling what would happen. As a man, he naturally had the responsibility to protect a woman. Not to mention, she wanted to help him out of kindness. Me? Tuaya pointed at herself and said in disbelief, "You allow me to follow you?" "Yes, for your safety. It should be now. Romac's cavalry scouts should have surrounded us. It is too dangerous for you to leave now." Yang Chendong said seriously, trying to be as emotionless as possible. However, when Tuaya heard this, she was still touched. "See, he's still worried about me." Although she couldn't say that she liked Yang Chendong, she didn't know why, but at this moment, her heart was filled with joy and joy. Things were just as Yang Chendong expected. Romac's cavalry scouts had indeed locked onto the stream. When the first and second squad walked towards the pile of short rocks, they followed from a distance. These scouts didn't have any intention of attacking. Even when they saw the cavalrymen galloping past them, they didn't make any moves to stop them. Scouts were scouts. Their responsibility was to gather information and lock onto targets. As for the rest, it was naturally left to the combat troops. The pile of short rocks, as its name suggested, was made up of piles of broken rocks. Even after many months, it didn't seem to be very high. The highest point was only about 3 meters high. It didn't give them any advantage of looking down from a high vantage point. Fortunately, Yang Chendong didn't want to look for a high vantage point. He was satisfied as long as there was a place where he could stand and see further. The highest point of the pile of short rocks just happened to meet his requirements. Riding the white dragon horse, Yang Chendong slowly ascended and came to the top of the pile of short stones. Everywhere he looked, there were piles of stones one after another. They were scattered in all directions, dividing the area in front of him into dozens of pieces. This was the place where Yang Chendong asked for a small-scale cavalry battle. Xiaovi had already said that the information from the scouting camp was that the enemy had about 5,000 cavalry. If that was the case, if they were to find an open space, the enemy would be able to kill them in a single charge. There wouldn't be much room to maneuver. "Young master, are we going to stay here for a while?" Beta Persei saw Yang Chendong stop on his white dragon horse and guessed something. "That's right. This young master will stay here for a while. Come, put the flag here. From today onwards, the name of the 5-star army will be known throughout the grasslands." Yang Chendong said with a heroic tone, then pointed to an open space beside him. Hearing this, Beta Persei called for the guard team to take out a bright 5-star flag and put it beside Yang Chendong. The red flag immediately fluttered in the wind, showing off its charm. All the guard team members wore black armor with iron masks and wore Kevlar helmets that didn't fit in to protect the important parts of their heads. Yang Chendong also covered his white dragon horse with a layer of iron armor and changed into the same outfit as the other guard team members. When they stood under the 5-star flag like this, a powerful aura was unknowingly born. It made Princess Tia, who was watching all this curiously from the side, feel like she was about to meet the Great Khan. Just as the preparations were in place, a cloud of dust rose from the south of the pile of short rocks, making it impossible to see who was coming and how many people there were. Out of instinct, Tia asked with some apprehension, "Is it the cavalry brought by Romak?" Looking in the direction, Yang Chendong shook his head with a smile. "It shouldn't be them. It's our cavalry." "Your cavalry?" Tia was a little surprised after saying this. She was more and more unable to understand the origin of this Yang Dong. She was certain that this was the first time she saw the 5-star flag in front of her. But this curiosity was quickly suppressed. Right in front of them, another cavalry team loomed in the distance. Tuaya, who was riding beside Yang Chendong, had a solemn expression on her face. Although Yang Chendong had already surprised her, the number of cavalry that Romak brought was obviously too much. Even if there were more than 100 black cavalry, could they turn the situation around? If Yang Chendong was defeated by Romak, as a fellow traveler, she wouldn't have an easy time either. Thinking of this, Tuaya's gaze looked towards the northeast, but there was still no movement there. It made sense when she thought about it. Bauyin had only left for a short period of time. Her father still needed to gather the cavalry when he received the news. It was impossible for him to rush over so quickly. What was different from Tuoya was that Yang Shindong's expression was normal. He didn't show any fluctuations in his emotions from beginning to end. Until the first cavalry team appeared, a rider jumped out and arrived under the pile of rocks. News and cavalry team leader Yi Wei greets the sixth young master. Chapter 682. Yila did not kneel, as he was not used to saluting. Instead, he placed his right hand in front of his chest and made a salute similar to the Mongols. Yila, you only have 3,000 men. This time, your opponent has 5,000 cavalry. Do you have the confidence to fight? Do you have the confidence to win? Yang Shindong's bright eyes stared at Yila, sixth young master. Don't worry. Our news and cavalry will fight to the last moment and do our best. Yila's expression was firm, as if saying, just wait and see what we'll do. Good. Then I will wait for your excellent performance. Yang Shindong said in a heroic voice. In his eyes, there was no trace of worry. He also did not say anything to boost morale. It was as though the news and cavalry was his direct subordinates, and there was no need to doubt him. Yila originally thought that Yang Shindong would say something to boost morale. At the very least, he should give him some assurance. However, he did not say anything. This made him feel that he was trusted. Yes, he was trusted. When facing a true subordinate, there was no need for any promises. They would do their best. Seeing that Yang Shindong had nothing else to say, Yila turned around and mounted his horse to return to the troops. He looked at Lu Dai and the 3,000 cavalrymen and said loudly, Brothers, it's time for us to perform. The sixth young master is looking at us from behind. Our parents and wives in our hometown are also waiting for us to perform meritorious deeds. Right now, we only need to do our best to destroy the enemy cavalry and give them a better life. Is everyone confident? Kill the enemy and perform meritorious deeds. Kill the enemy and perform meritorious deeds. The 3,000 Nuzan cavalry below all shouted excitedly. Very good. Divide the cavalry according to the plan. Spread out according to the different terrains. Use the Nuzan's unique guerrilla tactics in a 3-to-3 attack formation. Yila, who had shouted, announced the battle order coolly. Yila was very confident in these elite Nuzan cavalry. As long as they performed well, what was there to be afraid of even if there were more than 5,000 cavalry? The 3,000 Nuzan cavalrymen that had just gathered dispersed, and each of them searched for a suitable battlefield. Atop the pile of rocks, Tuoya said worriedly, Young Master Yang, you only have 3,000 cavalry while the other side is 5,000. Can you win? Definitely. Yang Shindong's firm voice came out from his mouth. His eyes were indifferent as he stood there like a god descending to the mortal world like a towering mountain. The Nuzan cavalry was making all sorts of preparations before the battle. In the distance, Halaruoku and Rumyuk were approaching with their 5,000 cavalrymen. According to the cavalry scouts under his command, Haliruo already knew that the strength of the enemy this time was not weak. They actually had 3,000 cavalrymen. Of course, although they weren't weak, he still didn't put them in his eyes. He had brought the Walla cavalry that he thought was the most powerful. Back then, Sha Ming's army was like cutting chickens and vegetables. They had won more than once. Not to mention, now that they had the advantage in numbers, there was even less chance of defeat. Rumyuk, your chance to show off has come. I've taken a fancy to these horses and slaves. Do you understand? Haliruo's eyes revealed a trace of ruthlessness as he spoke. Young master, don't worry. Rumyuk patted his chest and promised. His thoughts were the same as Haliruo's. His limited vision made him believe that the Walla cavalry was the strongest in the world. As for the previous loss to the 100 or so black cavalry, that was only because the enemy's equipment was too good. That was a special case. Cavalryman, attack with me. Taking out the saber at his waist, he leaned forward and waved it. Under Rumyuk's loud roar, the 5,000 cavalrymen behind him moved. Like dumplings being dropped into a pot, the cavalrymen charged forward one after another. Tens of thousands of horses galloped forward, their shouts shaking the sky. Under the dry weather, bursts of smoke and dust rose up. From afar, it looked like a huge sandstorm that wanted to swallow everything. In terms of momentum, the Vala cavalry's performance was still very good. However, because of the terrain, the war horses were unable to gallop on the sharp stones. The originally huge flood had no choice but to split up in the middle and charge towards the small battlefields that the Nusan cavalry had set up. If it was in a wide area, the cavalry would compete in momentum. The morale of the troops, the number of soldiers, and the bravery of the soldiers would all play a decisive role. Once one side's formation was disrupted and broken, it often meant that the balance of the battle was tipping. It often meant that the battle was about to end. Yang Chendong used the terrain in advance to suppress the Wala cavalry's advantage in numbers. This competition was based on the morale, courage, and martial arts of both sides. Yang Chendong was extremely confident in all of these. He had spent a lot of effort to subdue the Nusan cavalry. He firmly believed that this time they would be able to deliver a perfect result. No one knew better than him how the future Nusan cavalry became slaves and how they replaced the Ming dynasty to establish a new dynasty. In addition, these Nusan cavalry were equipped with the sharpest sabers. There was no way they would lose. There was no reason for them to lose. The smoke and dust in the sky greatly affected the effect of watching the battle. When the two sides fought, both Yang Chendong and Heruo could not see the situation on the battlefield. However, the two of them were not in a hurry. They seemed to be full of confidence in their cavalry. They even firmly believed that the moment the battle ended, the winner would be them. Compared to the calmness of these two people, Tuoya looked as if she had lost her soul. If the Khan sent reinforcements, they would only appear there. But when would they arrive? On the battlefield, the smoke and dust in the sky also affected the knights on both sides. Fortunately, this was not the first time they had fought on the battlefield. As veterans, they knew that being impatient would not solve any problems. Only by believing in the sabers in their hands, believing in the war horses under them, and killing more enemies would they be able to obtain the final victory. One of the Wala cavalry lost contact with his comrades because of the obstruction, but he did not panic. Instead, he held the saber in his hand and carefully sensed everything around him. While continuing to find his comrades, he was also on guard against the sudden appearance of enemies. Suddenly, there was movement on the right side of his body. Out of instinct, the Wala cavalry raised the saber in his hand. The moment he saw that the other person was not his comrade, he quickly lowered the saber in his hand. Under the powerful force, the saber collided with the saber on the opposite side. Dang! With a crisp but powerful collision, the two of them paused at the same time and then separated immediately upon contact. Both sides were prepared for this strike, and no one was able to gain any advantage. The two figures crossed each other, turned around, and slashed out again. It was almost the same tactic, the same posture, and the two sabers collided again. Then one of the sabers suddenly broke from the middle. The broken weapon was naturally the saber in the hands of the Vara cavalry. If it was not for the huge impact, perhaps his saber could have held on for a while. But when both sides used their full strength, after two clashes, the advantage of weapons was highlighted. The saber actually broke from the middle, and cold sweat instantly emerged from the body of the Wala cavalryman. Although it was June and the weather was very hot, he did not know why he was sweating all over. He did not know why. But since the saber in his hand broke from the middle, the next thing to do was to escape. Otherwise, if both sides swung their sabers, one saber could not reach the enemy's saber, but the enemy's saber could cut him. How could he fight this battle? Fortunately, when the saber hit the second time, the two sides were already facing each other, so it was naturally the best time to escape. The Wala cavalry pressed his legs and urged his horse to rush forward. He did not dare to turn back and fight the Nusan cavalry head-on. The Vara cavalryman was still lamenting his good luck that he wasn't killed by the enemy due to the disadvantage of his saber. Suddenly, Another cavalryman rushed out of the smoke. It was another Nusan cavalryman. Out of instinct and habit, the cavalryman slashed forward with his saber. However, he had forgotten that the saber in his hand had already been broken in half. Not only did his saber not hit his opponent, it was his opponent's saber that landed on his chest instead. Blood splattered, and a warm stream splashed on his face. While the Walla cavalry felt these changes, the strength in his body was quickly drained at this moment. He wanted to say something. For example, if it were not for the broken saber, he would not have died. But now his chest was split open, and his bones and organs were exposed. No matter how he opened his mouth, he could not make sound. Plop! With no strength left, the Walla cavalry finally fell from the horse. He looked at the sky with his eyes wide open. Perhaps this moment was a relief for him. This was just one of the many places on the battlefield. In fact, the same scene was happening all the time. Not long after the battle, countless Walla cavalry died because of the broken saber. They may be good at fighting, or they may be good at riding. But how could they defeat the equally powerful Nusan cavalry with their bare hands? One by one, the Walla cavalrymen were hacked to death and fell from their war horses, causing a cloud of dust to fly into the air. Outside the battlefield, Horror did not know that the scales of victory had tilted to the other side. He was still dreaming of the victory. Chapter 683. Due to their position being higher than the ground, Yang Qindong, Tuya, and the 5-star flag beside them were still clear and dazzling. All of this fell into the eyes of Hala Ruwa, and he couldn't help but reveal a trace of hatred. A man couldn't tolerate the hatred of killing his father and stealing his wife. Although Tuya wasn't his woman yet, and she hadn't even acknowledged it, Haliruo had long considered her as his woman. Since she was his woman, he could give her away, but he definitely wouldn't allow her to act on her own. Seeing her riding on a horse beside a handsome young man, glancing left and right, and even saying something from time to time, Hro was burning with jealousy. He stretched out his hand and pointed forward. Go, send someone up there and kill that man. Snatch that woman for me. Since it was the first battle, Lumek didn't send out all of his cavalry. The enemy only had 3,000 cavalry. He only needed to send out 3,000 cavalry to clinch the victory. As such, he still had 2,000 cavalrymen by his side. Once the young master gave the order, Lumek immediately complied. He pointed at 2 centurions and said, "You two, take the men from our main force and capture the person on the short rock. Remember, the man can die, but the woman must be brought back alive." Yes. The 2 centurions who were called out replied proudly. 200 men chasing after a few people. In their opinion, General Lump was being too cautious. Of course, they didn't know about the existence of the Black Cavalry. Otherwise, they wouldn't have thought of courting death. Yes, these 200 Walla cavalry were courting death. Only 200 people dared to have designs on Yang Qindong. Not to mention him personally taking action, just the 100 over Black Knights by his side would be enough to make them doubt their lives. The 2 groups of 200 cavalry didn't charge into the battlefield. Instead, they took a detour to the pile of rocks. With the speed of their war horses, they arrived at the left and right sides of the pile of rocks in less than an instant's time. The 200 cavalry approached with smiles on their faces. Release the arrows. Just when they thought they could reel in their prey, a wave of arrows pierced through the air. Over 100 arrows suddenly appeared from 2 different directions, flying towards the Walla cavalry that was still filled with anticipation. Clang! Caught off guard, the Walla cavalry took out their shields or made all kinds of difficult dodging movements. The arrows flew past them. Most of them dodged, and only a few were hit. However, they weren't in critical positions and didn't threaten their lives. Although the arrows didn't kill anyone, they effectively stopped the Walla cavalry's charge. Just when they were cursing and saying that it wasn't a gentleman's action, a large group of cavalry in black armor suddenly appeared on the 2 sides of the pile of rocks. Not only were they wrapped in black armor, but they also had black masks on their faces. Even the war horses under them were equipped with iron armor. They were armed to the teeth. Looking at the cavalry in black with a green helmet, the 200 cavalrymen couldn't help but be startled. This was the first time they had seen such an enemy. Silence, no sound, only the sound of the horses' hooves moving forward. The sound was like a drum that smashed into the hearts of every wall of cavalry, and the horror on their faces became more and more intense. At this time, the rhythm of the battlefield was completely taken over by the black cavalry. The hard training of the guards was effective at this time. The silent battle cry spread out endless murderous aura and shrouded the 200 Walla cavalry. Gulp! A centurion of the Walla unconsciously swallowed a mouthful of saliva, then nervously wiped the sweat dripping from his forehead and said in a trembling voice, "Fight with me." Only the heavens knew how much effort it took for him to say those words. Fortunately, he still managed to say them in the end. He didn't know why, but after saying this, he felt his mind relax, as if he had just completed a very difficult task. The other Walla cavalry also let out a sigh of relief at this moment. Then one by one, they gathered their courage, raised their sabers, and reappeared with the murderous aura from before. The 100 black cavalry were already ready at this moment. Almost at the same time, when the order to fight with me sounded, they spurred their horses forward and charged towards the 200 Walla cavalry. The sharp saber was raised high, and then, with an unstoppable momentum, it fell from the sky and chopped down on the bodies of the Walla cavalry that were charging towards them. The Black Knights did not need to defend and only needed to attack. They swung their sabers at the bodies of the Walla cavalrymen, allowing the other party to slash at their bodies, turning a deaf ear to it. The two sides crossed each other, but there was no sound of sabers clashing like usual. There was only the sound of sabers slashing on the black armor and the sound of sabers slashing on the body. After passing by each other, the two sides turned back and faced each other again. In the process, one by one, the Walla cavalry fell from their horses. The sabers were so sharp that some of the Walla cavalry had already been cut off by the sabers, but the blood didn't have time to flow out, and they still had the opportunity to turn their horses around. However, death was death. Half of the 200 cavalrymen had died in battle just because they made one extra move. They originally looked like they had the advantage in numbers, but at this moment, they were reduced by a lot. This scene made the surviving Walla cavalry tremble uncontrollably. There was no lack of desperados among them, and they were not afraid of death. But the way they died was still too strange. It was so strange that it made them feel cold, and they were at a loss of what to do, and they couldn't see any hope. There was still no sound, and the hundreds of black cavalry launched a second charge as if they had discussed it beforehand. Facing the oncoming black cavalry, there was no change in their expressions. The Walla cavalry was no longer as arrogant as before. On the contrary, a few of the more timid ones turned around and fled. They could see that there was no chance of winning against such an opponent. If they continued to stay, they would only be courting death. The Walla cavalry that turned around and fled was like a plague, and when it spread to the other Walla cavalry, they also turned their horses around and wanted to leave. It was just a head-on confrontation, but the morale of the opposing army was completely disintegrated at this moment. It had to be said that the black cavalry was too strong. In the face of the black cavalry's charge, the Walla cavalry that was one step behind had no way to escape. Those that were too slow were caught up and killed, and those that were too fast were shot through by the black cavalry's arrows. They fell on the road of escape. The 200 cavalrymen came with an aggressive aura, but when they really fought, they couldn't even withstand a single blow. They didn't even last for half an incense stick's worth of time before they were completely annihilated. In the distance, Hilaro and Rumyuk, who were watching this scene closely, had their eyes wide open. The short rock pile was slightly higher than the ground, and everything that happened there was clearly reflected in everyone's eyes. It was only then that everyone was shocked. What is that? When did such a powerful cavalry appear in the grasslands? After a while, Hilaro digested what he saw. His gaze fell on Rumyuk, and his questioning gaze was very obvious. I don't know. Rumyuk shook his head. They are the black cavalry I mentioned before. It seems that if we want to deal with them, we won't be able to outnumber them. Compared to the others, Rumyuk wasn't the most surprised. He had already seen the enemy's strength. However, the efficiency with which the Black Knights had killed the man had exceeded his expectations. That's right. With this reminder, Hilaruo wasn't angry. Instead, he was happy. These black cavalry have almost no openings, but wearing such heavy armor is bound to consume a lot of energy. As long as we can delay them, we can win through attrition. At that time, the armor will be ours. The more Hilaruo spoke, the more excited he became. Without waiting for Rumyuk to give any orders, he turned around and called out several names. The few of you, take 1,000 cavalry with you. Remember, these black cavalry's heavy armor is impenetrable. As long as you continue to exhaust their strength, you will definitely be able to defeat them. After witnessing the scene just now, no one wanted to face the black cavalry. However, this was an order from Hilaruo, and no one dared to disobey. The centurions who were called out could only grimace and agree. Soon after, they split up into several groups and charged toward the pile of short rocks. On the pile of rocks, the black cavalry's performance was so outstanding, and they were so close to the enemy that it was an eye-opener for Tuoya. Hey, young Master Yang, these black cavalry subordinates of yours are really too powerful. How about we make a deal? If you sell these black cavalry to us, I will definitely ask Father to give you a satisfactory price. Buy armor? I don't lack money. Yang Qindong shook his head and smiled. What kind of joke was this? When it came to earning money, who could compare to the Beyond Heaven Trading Company? Meanwhile, the owner behind the scenes of this trading company was himself. Everything that was sold there was made by Crimson City under his guidance. Comparing the amount of silver and the speed at which he earned money, he did not fear anyone. Don't be so quick to refuse. We're really sincere. Tuoya had become accustomed to Yang Qindong's arrogance. This person seemed to be unmoved in the face of any kind of temptation, but it was this kind of performance that had a unique charm that Tuoya liked very much. Chapter 684. Let's talk about it later. Yang Qindong didn't want to argue with Tuoya on this issue, so he tried to stall for time. Then, he looked at the main battlefield. Although he couldn't see the situation clearly due to the dust, he had confidence in the Nuzan cavalry. When he thought of the phrase, Nuzan are invincible with a full sword, he was full of confidence. Although the 1,000 Walla cavalry were unwilling, they had no choice but to come to the pile of rocks. When they faced the black cavalry at such a close distance, an indescribable murderous aura surged towards them, causing the Walla cavalry to involuntarily stop in their tracks. Everyone attacked together. Don't fight them head-on. Use guerrilla tactics to exhaust their stamina. The centurion in the lead instructed his subordinates. Then, he carefully rode his horse forward and formed an encirclement around the black cavalry guards. The cavalry maintained a certain distance between each other. This way, if they encountered any danger, they could quickly turn around and leave. The encirclement was formed, but every time the guards moved forward, the enemy in front of them would retreat. They simply did not want to fight them head-on. The tactic of stalling was perfectly demonstrated by the Vola cavalry. When they were forging the black armor and warhorse chainmail, Wuwa had said that although they had raised the quality of the armor to the highest level, armor was still armor and still had some weight. When two armies fought, it might not be obvious in a short period of time. However, if the battle dragged on, the problem would naturally be exposed. Wuwa only had the ability to forge armor. He didn't have any way to deal with the problems and things that might happen on the battlefield. Regarding this, Yang Qindong didn't insist. Instead, he called Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao over and told them how to solve the problem. 1. Alternate resting. This meant that if the enemy was too far away and wanted to use a war of attrition to deal with them, then half of the members would rest and the other half would be on guard. This way, they would have enough energy and stamina to kill the enemy on the battlefield. 2. Attack with arrows. If the enemy was too close and wanted to exhaust them by surrounding them, then use arrows to counterattack and cause chaos in the enemy's formation, forcing them to flee. 3. Musket fire. If the enemy's encirclement was set up far away, about 1 li away, then they would not be able to rest at ease, and if the range of the arrows was too far, then they would use their muskets to counterattack, killing the enemy when they least expect it, and killing the enemy when they are helpless. To sum it up, the safety of the team members was their top priority. As for whether the appearance of the flintlock would allow others to guess their identities, they couldn't do so much in a situation where their lives were threatened. Yang Shindong's plan was very comprehensive, taking into account the distance and any possible situation. Therefore, when they saw that the other party was only surrounding them without attacking, no matter if it was Chou Wu, Dao Xiao, or the other guards, they did not feel frustrated at all. Instead, they followed the plan and took out their bows and arrows, launching a fierce counterattack. The Walla cavalry was less than 100 meters away from the Black cavalry, which was the best range for arrows. When arrows were taken out from the quiver, they pierced through the air and greeted the Walla cavalry, and a one-sided massacre began. At such a close distance, and with the strict archery training, the Black cavalry could not say that they were always accurate, but at least 30% of their arrows hit their opponents. This was because the Walla cavalry only needed to dodge and did not need to think about attacking. Otherwise, this accuracy would have been even higher. As for the Walla cavalry, when faced with the arrows of the Black Knights at close range, there would always be someone who would be hit by the arrows one after another. Some of them would be killed by the arrows and fall from their horses. If they were injured, they would lie on their horses and lose their ability to fight. The feeling of being a live target was naturally not good. The Vola cavalrymen also began to retaliate with their bows and arrows. Unfortunately, their arrows were very accurate, but regardless of whether they hit a person or a horse, they only left a white mark before falling back to the ground. They didn't cause any damage at all. This was not an exchange of arrows. It was a massacre. With no choice, the Walla cavalry could only retreat and get out of the effective range of the arrows. Charge! Captain Xiu V of the Black Cavalry seized this opportunity. When the Walla cavalry formation was in chaos and retreated, he suddenly launched a counterattack and caught the Walla cavalry off guard. In the process, hundreds of knights died under the sharp sabers of the Black cavalry. The initiative was completely in the hands of the Black cavalry. Although the Walla cavalry had the advantage in numbers, it was difficult for them to say anything. They could only follow from afar and did not dare to get closer. Taking advantage of the gap, half of the Black cavalry jumped off their horses to reduce the weight of their comrades and try to recover as much energy as possible. In the eyes of the Walla cavalry, this action of the Black cavalry was seen as an opportunity, and they took the opportunity to launch 2 attacks. However, because the distance was too far, the Black cavalry had enough time to jump on their horses and get into a defensive position. Not only that, they took advantage of the fact that their opponents could not immediately move away and launched 2 counterattacks, killing hundreds of their opponents. After 2 attacks and many corpses, the Walla cavalry became smarter. They only surrounded the Black cavalry from afar and allowed them to rest. They did not take another step forward. Haliruo watched helplessly as the cavalry he sent out was unable to do anything to the Black Knights. He wanted to scold these people for being cowards, but considering that they had already lost more than 40% of their men, continuing to fight would only bring disgrace upon themselves. Thus, he gave up on ordering the cavalry to continue attacking. Instead, he set his sights on the main battlefield. In his mind, as long as he achieved victory on the main battlefield, he would be able to use the advantage of numbers to charge towards the pile of rocks. At that time, the hundreds of Black Knights would definitely be in his hands. The sun had already set and the sky was gradually turning dark. The dust on the main battlefield did not fly as high as it did at the beginning. The dust did not rise, which meant that the main battlefield had already reached a conclusion. At this moment, both Yang Shindong and Har were doing their best to keep an eye on the battlefield. Victory or defeat on the main battlefield was very likely to affect the victory or defeat of the other side. Follow me and kill. Just as everyone was looking at the main battlefield expectantly and waiting for the result, a cavalry suddenly appeared from the south side of the battlefield. Because of the darkness, it was impossible to see how many people there were. However, judging from the battle cries, it was not a small number. Are these the enemy's reinforcements? Horror stood on his horse and listened attentively. His expression was not good. He relied on the strength and numbers of the Walla cavalry. He did not know the result of the battle, but his advantage in numbers was getting smaller and smaller. I don't know. Lumek shook his head. He really did not know who these people were. Speaking of which, this was the first time he had seen Yang Chendong. It was also the first time he had heard of the Five-Star Army. In the past, the Five-Star Army had come to the grasslands, but they had only come in a hurry and left in a hurry. When Windchaser discovered that his forces were not enough to face any opponents on the grasslands, he tactfully retreated and stayed in the new Gondusi region to recruit soldiers. As a result, the name of the Five-Star Army was rarely known on the grasslands. Lumek's reply made Horror feel a bit disappointed. However, since the enemy's reinforcements had appeared, he could not ignore them. Go. I'll give you 500 people. Go and stop them. Before victory or defeat is decided on the main battlefield, you absolutely cannot let these people charge in. Horror originally had 2,000 people by his side. Just the short stone pile alone sent out 1,200 people. Right now, he only had 800 people. Giving Lumek 500 people was already the most he could do. Yes. Lumek cupped his fists and replied, appearing full of confidence. In reality, leading Walla's elite cavalry, he also had this kind of confidence. As long as it wasn't an impenetrable existence like the Black Cavalry. Even if the enemy's military strength was greater than his, he really did not need to fear anyone. Lumek was extremely confident, but he did not know who his opponent was this time. Because the sky had already darkened, even Yang Chendong on the short stone pile did not know who the first batch of reinforcements were. Tiger's Mane, publicly recognized as the person closest to Yang Chendong, as well as the person who followed the sixth young master the earliest, became the first batch of reinforcements to arrive. Ever since Yang Chendong appointed him as the commander of the independent regiment, Tiger's Mane had put all of his energy into it. 10 infantry battalions, 6 cavalry battalions. Just as the personnel were formed, they were fiercely trained by him. The soldiers of the independent battalion were made up of 6 auxiliary battalions and 4,000 Ming soldiers. And these 4,000 Ming soldiers were all captives. Wanting to lead such an army and have enough fighting strength was not an easy thing to do. Even if it was handed over to the 3rd Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo, it would take a period of time to form a fighting force. But the same thing happened to Tiger's Mane. He was the confidant of the 6th young master, and his superiority was reflected. Relying on his iron relationship with the Logistics Battalion Commander Beta Persei, he took out large amounts of silver, meat, cigarettes, wine, and other things, and distributed them as rewards to the soldiers below. Cigarettes, the first thing that appeared in this world, actually became the favorite of the soldiers in a very short period of time. It was as if they smoked when they were free, or after eating and drinking, it was very satisfying, like they were immortals. Not to mention, silver, wine, and meat were freely provided. Under the stimulation of these things, the captives of the Ming army revealed the fierce side in their bones. In order to obtain more rewards, everyone held back their energy and worked hard to perform in the training field. Under the competition, the fighting strength of the independent regiment was rapidly increasing. Chapter 685. Tiger's Mane was overjoyed when he saw the changes in his army. He was waiting for the battle to start so that he could show off to his brothers and the 6th young master that he was also a talented soldier. Just as he was thinking about when the battle would start, a scout reported that the 6th young master was about to fight with a group of 5,000 Walla cavalry at the Stony region. On his side, there were only 3,000 cavalrymen from the Nuzin Cavalry Division. When Tiger's Mane heard the news, he was both excited and nervous. He was excited because his chance to show off had come. He was also nervous because he was worried about the loyalty of the Nuzin Cavalry Division. If they were to change sides on the battlefield, the young master only had 2 guards with him. That was only 100 people. How could he protect him? Worried about the sixth young master's safety, Tiger's Mane immediately ordered the 6 cavalry divisions to follow him to protect the sixth young master. As for the 10 infantry divisions, they immediately ran forward. Before they left, Tiger's Mane didn't forget to provoke his soldiers. Listen up, you will never fail when you follow the sixth young master in battle. This time, the enemy has 5,000 cavalrymen. If you do well, you can turn from infantry to cavalry. Of course, in a battle like this, we can't care so much. No one knows if we will be able to get that many horses. For the sake of fairness, we can only rely on first come, first serve. Those who arrive first will get a horse. Those who arrive later will get nothing. Let's go. Charge. After everyone understood Tiger Edge's meaning, the 10 battalions began a mad race. It was as if they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get a war horse if they were late. Everyone ran with big strides, as if they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to get a war horse. As for Tiger's Mane, he had already led the 6 cavalry battalions and was the first to arrive on the battlefield. Once they entered the battlefield, the sky was getting dark. Tiger's Mane didn't have time to analyze the situation. But from the looks of it, the young master's safety should be guaranteed. Since that was the case, he would kill the enemy first. The more enemies he killed, the more his side would gain victory. Coincidentally, Tiger's Mane was still thinking about how to find an opponent when Lumik appeared with 500 Walla cavalry. The uniforms of the two sides were completely different. With just a glance, Tiger's Mane could determine that the other party was an enemy. In addition, Lumik was charging towards him with his saber. It was clear whether he was a friend or a foe. Come on, let's kill together. Kill one and you get 10 cigarettes, half a caddy of wine, 10 taels of silver, and half a caddy of fatty meat. Kill. With a loud shout, Tiger's Mane announced the bets one by one. Then, he leaped into the air and charged at Lumak. With great rewards, there will be brave men. Under the stimulation of such material rewards, the 6 cavalry battalions' eyes turned red. They all rushed forward, giving the impression that if they were late by one step, there would be no one to kill and they wouldn't be able to get anything good. They charged towards the battlefield like wild beasts. Tiger's Mane, who was wearing a black cape, was like the tip of an arrow. He was the first to arrive in front of the Walla army cavalry. With a wave of his saber, he met his opponent head-on. Ding! After a crisp and clear sound of collision, the two figures passed by each other. The Walla cavalry's warhorse swayed. It was obvious that they were knocked back by the force of the collision. Feeling the pain from his arm, the Walla cavalry soldier's eyes flashed with extreme shock. This person was Lumik. He had also taken the lead and wanted to win with one strike. He never thought that the strength he was so proud of would be at a disadvantage in the first clash. Who is that person? The thought only appeared in his mind. Before he could analyze it, more cavalry soldiers appeared in front of him. They were the independent cavalry soldiers that followed Tiger's Mane. When they saw Lumik appear in front of them, they all rushed to kill him. They ignored the general's armor on Lumik. At this moment, this person was meat on their plate. They only thought about how to eat him. Ding, ding, dang, dang. In a short period of time, Lumik continuously exchanged blows with more than 10 independent cavalry soldiers. The saber in his hand finally broke into two. Even though he was a general and the quality of his saber was not bad, under continuous collisions and in front of an even sharper saber, it was not easy to hold on for so long. When the saber broke, a layer of cold sweat appeared on Lumik's head. The doubts in his heart grew. Who were these people? Why were their morale so high? They were all attacking fiercely without any regard for their lives. Why were the sabers in their hands so hard? It was fine if it was just one person, but it seemed like everyone was holding a saber of the same strength. What kind of opponent was this? Why had he never heard of them before? Lumik's heart chilled. He threw away the broken saber in his hand and took out a brand new one. He turned around and attacked. He was indeed afraid of being killed. When he turned around, he wanted to retreat with his brothers and then inform Haruo of the news. There was no way to win this battle. After turning around, Lumik relied on his good martial arts and skillful horse riding skills to dodge the attacks of the independent cavalry soldiers again and again. But the more he did this, the more frightened he was. This was because he realized that from the time he turned around until now, he did not see a single one of his subordinates. Could it be that they were all killed? Or had they escaped? Impossible. How long has it been? His subordinates are all experienced elites. They can't all be killed. They must have escaped. He thought firmly in his heart, or rather, he comforted himself. Finally, Lumak discovered an extremely serious problem. He was completely surrounded. There were enemies everywhere, and he couldn't escape. Whether Lumak was willing to believe it or not, the 500 cavalry soldiers he brought with him were all killed by the independent cavalry soldiers. They originally had the advantage of numbers, 2,000 against 500. In addition, under the stimulation of the tiger's mane, the morale of the soldiers was at its peak. Everyone wanted to achieve military merits. Everyone used all their strength. Under such momentum, the 500 Walla cavalry soldiers were like small boats in the sea. They were quickly swallowed up. Even so, there were still many independent cavalry soldiers who did not have the chance to kill anyone. Thinking that so many military merits and rewards were about to leave them, they all cursed angrily. Who the F***CK is so fast? So cheap. Will it kill you to leave me an opponent? Who said it wasn't? In the blink of an eye, there is no living opponent. Even if you want to snatch military merits, you don't have to be so fast. I still want to eat meat, drink wine, and smoke. Hey, there is still one alive here. Ha ha ha. No one fight with me. This is mine. Bullshit. I've had my eyes on him for a long time. This person's life is mine. No, it's mine. It belongs to whoever kills him. Go. Battle cries and angry shouts rose and fell one after another. When Runk heard these voices, he was shocked and started to hate himself. Why'd he only know Chinese? If he didn't, he wouldn't be so shocked. Runk thought to himself, why did I know Chinese? If I didn't, I wouldn't be so shocked. Of course, now is not the time to think about this. The most important thing was how to face hundreds and thousands of cavalry soldiers. However, was it possible for him to fight against 100 or even 1,000 people by himself? On the main battlefield, the smoke and dust became smaller and smaller. Finally, when the sky was completely dark, the dust on the battlefield dispersed, and the result of the battle was finally revealed. The ground was littered with corpses and lonely war horses. A night breeze blew past, bringing with it the smell of blood. 3,000 against 3,000. After more than 2 hours of life and death battle, less than half of the 6,000 people were left. However, upon closer inspection, these half of them were dressed in the same uniform. Their fatigued but excited bodies were wrapped in green battle suits. They were the warriors of the Nuzin Cavalry Division. After a bloody battle of 3,000 people, the remaining 2,500 people were all members of the Nuzin Cavalry Regiment. Although many of them were injured, they were still standing on their horses, which proved that they were the victors. After experiencing such a bloody battle, as long as their bodies recovered, there would be an additional layer of iron-blooded aura around them. After experiencing a life and death battle, they would also have some personal insights. They would have more skills to survive and a chance to survive in the future battle. We won. Yila looked left and right. Although his vision was limited due to the darkness, he still couldn't help but shout out in excitement when he saw that all he could see were his own people. Following this shout, there were more responses from the surrounding people. We won, we won. Standing on a pile of rocks, Yang Qindong saw this scene and couldn't help but relax, a hint of a smile on his lips. Although this situation was within his expectations, the loss of less than 500 people in exchange for the loss of 3,000 cavalry was still delightful. We really won. Your soldiers are this strong? Tuoya's beautiful eyes widened once more, and when she looked at Yang Qindong, there were a few stars in her eyes. Although Yang Qindong did not make a move in this battle, his identity as the commander had been confirmed without a doubt. To possess such strength at such a young age, it was not an exaggeration to call him a hero. Every girl had a dream of becoming a hero. At this moment, Yang Qindong, who was already very handsome, had an even higher image in Tuoya's heart. Hilaruo's face was ashen. He had never expected such a result and could not accept it. The Vala cavalry had always been synonymous with the elite cavalry in the past few years. When facing the great Ming and Tatar cavalry, they were not afraid. So how could they be defeated today? Chapter 686. Young Master. General Lumek's army has been completely annihilated, and the general has also died in battle. We should withdraw. A guard rode up to Hilario and spoke in an urgent voice. He didn't directly say that they had lost, and only said to withdraw. This was already giving Hilario a lot of face. Although the young master couldn't figure out the reason, his desire to live still prevailed. Okay, we'll withdraw now. Withdraw. Young master, should we inform the others to retreat as well? Another bodyguard seemed to have suddenly thought of something as he asked. No need. Let them stay and block the enemy. The rest of us will withdraw. Hilario had completely calmed down. It was precisely because of this that he said this. From this point alone, it could be seen that he was a ruthless person who would do anything to achieve his goals. Under the cover of darkness, the chaos on the battlefield, and the lag in information, Hilario escaped without a word. What he left behind were the corpses of nearly 5,000 cavalry, including Lumek and the captives. Hilario made a very smart choice and left with less than 10 guards, so no one discovered his tracks. It wasn't until the battlefield was cleaned that they discovered that his corpse was nowhere to be found. But this wasn't important. What was important was that they had won this battle. The Jurchen cavalry had used their own strength to prove their ability and obtained Yang Chendong's attention. It was already late at night, and the short stone pile was still brightly lit with torches. After the battle, the Jurchen cavalry were still cleaning up the battlefield. Fortunately, Tiger's Mane arrived in time with the 6 cavalry battalions of the Independent Regiment, greatly increasing the speed of the cleanup. The 5-star flag was still there as before, unfurling in the wind. Beta Persei had already prepared a military tent for him to rest in. More than usual, he had prepared an extra tent for Princess Toya. This time, Toya didn't escape. When the battle wasn't over, she even pulled out her saber, as if she wanted to charge down with Yang Chendong. Her image as a heroine won the basic respect of everyone. It was late at night, and Yang Chendong hadn't gone to bed yet. He called Tiger's Mane, Yila, Lu Dai, and the others over for an impromptu military meeting. Looking at Tiger's Mane and Yela, Yang Chendong's words of encouragement rang out. The Nuzan cavalry performed very well in this battle. You will be rewarded handsomely, and your contributions will be doubled. You will have the first pick of the captives to make up for the losses in this battle. After daybreak, collect the bodies of the martyrs and hold a memorial service. The Independent Regiment is worthy of praise for their timely rescue. The extra war horses will be used as a reward to gradually develop all of the infantry into cavalry. Thank you, young master. Thank you, 6th young master. Tiger's Mane, Yela, Lu Dai, and the others were all overjoyed, although they had also lost people in this battle, especially the Nuzan cavalry who had lost close to 500 people. How could there be no deaths in a war? For the sake of Jurchen's future, this sacrifice was worth it. After the meeting, most of them didn't rest. Instead, they continued to clean up the battlefield. They dug several huge pits to bury the dead. This was also a form of respect for their opponents. Otherwise, in such an environment, the corpses of the dead soldiers would end up in the crows' hands. Summer nights were always very short. At around 3 o'clock, the sky had already begun to brighten. The field of vision was vast, and the speed of cleaning up the battlefield became even faster. After burying the dead, Yela and Lu Dai also selected 500 elite soldiers from the captives. As long as they trained a little, they would be able to make up for the losses in the previous battle. Tiger's Mane counted the number of war horses. There were more than 4,000 of them. When the 10 infantry battalions arrived, all of them could be turned into cavalry. The cavalry and horses were like brothers. It was precisely because of this special relationship that when the cavalry charged, very few people would take the initiative to hurt the horses. Unless they couldn't fight, otherwise, no one would deliberately hurt the horses. In this way, it was convenient for the 5-star regiment and helped the independent regiment. When the sky was completely bright, breakfast was already ready. Smoke rose in spirals from the kitchen, and the aroma of meat floated everywhere. Tuaya also woke up from her sleep in the tent. She looked at the 5-star army with a curious expression on her face. Breakfast was ready, but the 5-star army didn't satisfy their appetite. Instead, they gathered together and held a memorial service for the dead soldiers under the leadership of Yang Chendong. Their achievements were read out loud. Even the names of the people were read out by Yang Chendong. Many of the news and cavalry cried at the scene. Obviously, after this memorial service, they were moved by Yang Chendong's actions and became more united. After killing a few Walla prisoners who refused to surrender to comfort the souls of the dead soldiers in heaven, breakfast began. Although the food was not as warm as before, none of the soldiers said anything about it. The memorial service still lingered in their minds for a long time. Some of them even thought that if they died in battle, their names would be read out by the 6th young master in front of everyone. Perhaps that would be the proudest moment of their lives. 7 a.m. The sun hung high in the sky. Anyone who knew about the weather knew that today was going to be another sunny day. At this time, a large number of cavalry suddenly appeared from the northeast direction of the short rock pile. A large number of cavalry appeared in the northeast direction. Everyone, get on your horses and get into formation. After the scouts at the front reported the news, the 5-star army became lively. No matter if it was the news and cavalry or the soldiers of the independent regiment, no one felt afraid at this moment. Instead, they all revealed a firm fighting spirit. Perhaps people would die in war, but for some people, wasn't it a chance to show off? Tuaya stood at the highest point of the short rock pile and looked from afar. When she finally saw the enemy's flag, she jumped up like a little girl. It's the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. It's the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. Everyone, don't be nervous. They're on our side. The 5-star army didn't seem to hear them. Everyone's eyes were still filled with determination and killing intent. Report. A large number of infantry appeared in the east. It should be the independent regiment's infantry. The scout reported another piece of news. Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon horse, smiled. Let Tiger's Mane bring them here. Commander Yin, come here. Yang Chendong pointed at Yinda, the company commander of the reconnaissance battalion, who came to report the news. While the latter looked excited, Yang Chendong called him to his side and whispered something to him. Then, he nodded repeatedly and spurred his horse away. Soon, he disappeared without a trace. Tuaya didn't look at what Yang Chendong was doing. After seeing the 5-star army's strong fighting spirit, she was still full of fighting spirit even though she didn't have much rest last night. She left on her horse and went straight to meet the Mongol army of the Gobi Desert. After seeing the 5-star army's fighting strength, she didn't want her own army to be enemies with them. That wouldn't be a good thing. As soon as Tuaya left, Beta Persei came to Yang Chendong. Young master, Princess Tuaya still has a good impression of you. You might be a family in the future. Do you want me to tell the brothers to relax? Don't be so tense. You're acting like enemies. How can we be a family? Beta Persei, I think your skin is tight recently. It seems that the burden I gave you isn't heavy enough. How about this, after you go back this time, train the logistics camp well. The standard will be based on the results of the 3rd-class army assessment. Yang Chendong said with a smile that wasn't a smile. No, young master, I'm talking too much. I didn't say anything. Beta Persei kept waving his hands and immediately admitted defeat. How could he not know what the logistics camp was like? They were all old and weak Baiman captives. Some of their bodies could be described as thin as a match. It was a miracle that they could live until now. How could they be trained to the level of a 3rd-class army? Even a 4th-class army would barely touch the boundary. Beta Persei admitted defeat. Yang Chendong didn't want to pursue him. Instead, he looked at the approaching Gobi Desert Mongol army and said, Remember, in this world, benefits are always as big as the sky. With enough benefits, enemies can become friends, and friends can become enemies. This requires us to be vigilant at all times. We can't make the mistake of underestimating the enemy because of taking things for granted. If that happens, we'll be the sinners of the army. Beta Persei nodded thoughtfully as he listened. Only Yang Qindong knew that the five-star army could be considered as a lone army on the prairie. Any force here could become a friend or an enemy. Once a step was wrong, it could lead to eternal damnation. As the commander of an army, he must be careful. Tuoya rode a horse to meet the approaching Gobi Desert Mongol army. In the leading position of the army, she saw a middle-aged man in his 50s. A woman's voice of joy sounded first. "Father, why are you here?" "Tuoya." When the middle-aged man saw that the person coming from afar was his only daughter, his frosty face finally changed and a smile appeared on his face. When the father and daughter reunited, Sudur Khan looked at his daughter and found that she didn't change at all. When he found that there wasn't a single wound on her body, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. Baoyin came back and said that Heruo, that bastard toad who wants to eat swan meat, brought a lot of cavalry to threaten you. Since you're fine now, where is he? Don't be afraid. Although father came in a hurry this time, I also brought 20,000 cavalry. Sud's bloodline was a branch of the Golden family. Although it couldn't be said to be completely orthodox, there was a natural nobility in the bloodline. People like him were prideful. Once someone like him decided to do something, he would have a lot of charisma. Being able to gather 20,000 cavalry in such a short time was enough to show his ability. Chapter 687. Tuoya was very touched that her father had brought 20,000 cavalrymen to save her. But when it came to Heraluo, she still said proudly, "Heraluo, he has already been defeated and fled." Ran away? Suade's expression froze. How many cavalrymen did he bring with him? And who was it that chased them away? Facing her father, Tuoya naturally wouldn't hide anything. She told him everything she had heard and seen. After she finished talking about Haleruo's defeat and Lumik's decapitation, she continued to chatter. "Father, this five-star army is very interesting. They even held a memorial service for the dead. They recited the names of all the dead soldiers. You don't know this, but many of the warriors who were still alive were moved to tears." Suade wasn't interested in this memorial service. In his opinion, they had held such a service before. Wasn't it just inviting people to cross the dead? What he was curious about was where this five-star army came from and why they were so strong. Why hadn't he heard of them before? Of course, the memorial service wasn't an ordinary one. Toya didn't know about this, so she didn't explain. As for the five-star army's strength, it was already proven. There was no need to explain. "Tuoya, have you figured out the origin of this five-star army?" Suade was more curious about where this cavalryman who defeated Heraluo belonged to. Were they on good terms with the Mongols? Walla? What about Tatar or Great Ming? I don't know. Tuoya was suddenly interrupted by her father. She looked a little unhappy. However, this was her father, who she had always treated with dignity and respect since she was young. She could only think about it in her heart, but she didn't dare to show it. Suade had expected Tuoya to say she didn't know, so he didn't pursue the matter. Instead, he continued to ask, "You said they fought for an entire night and didn't rest? Then they should be very tired, right?" Previously, Baoyin reported that the enemy cavalry had a type of armor that was not afraid of ordinary swords and spears. That is definitely something good. Do you think that if we attack now, these things will fall into the hands of our Mongol army? Suda's tone changed, and he looked like he was about to snatch it. When Tuoya heard this, her eyes couldn't help but widen. "Father, that kind of black armor is very powerful. Even when I wanted to buy it before, they didn't have any intention of selling it. Because that thing is too powerful. Even if we want to snatch it, it won't be easy. Besides, they just saved my daughter's life." Tuoya naturally didn't want the Mongol army and the five-star army to fight. Let's not talk about who wins and who loses first. When two tigers fight, one of them is bound to be injured. At that time, no matter who won or lost, it would not be the result she wanted to see. Tuoya's impatience had already shown on her face, and she seemed to want to dissuade him. However, Suda had already opened his mouth. "Let's see. We want to buy it, but they won't sell it. Then we can only snatch it. As for battle strength, don't you have confidence in our Mongol army? As for them saving you, it was just along the way. They were saving themselves. With just a few words, he made the 5-star army look like they had nothing to do. It also revealed his determination to fight. They had just wiped out Haruo's 5,000 cavalry and seized Zhongfeng. They had just gone through a huge battle and were exhausted. If they didn't attack now, it would be difficult to find a suitable opportunity. Kamubala secretly passed down the order. When I give the order, the entire army will charge. Since he had made the decision, Suda naturally wouldn't be disturbed by others. He gave the order in front of Toya. Kamubala, translated from Chinese, meant white tiger. This person was indeed the bravest general by Suda's side. Knowing that there was a battle to fight, he immediately agreed with a face full of excitement. He turned around and let his personal guard pass the message. "Father, you can't." Tuoya's eyes were filled with shock. She knew the battle strength of the 5-star army. She also knew how powerful those black cavalry guards were. Although they had just gone through a huge battle, she felt that when facing Haruo's 5,000 cavalry, the 5-star army didn't use their full strength. At least, that young Master Yang didn't show any signs of worry. When she thought of that young face and his casual attitude towards everything, she didn't know why, but she felt a wave of uncertainty in her heart. "Baoyin, take the princess away. If she shouts again, seal her mouth." Suda seemed to know that Tuoya would stop him and was already prepared. After giving the order, Baoyin walked out from the troops and looked at Tuoya with a troubled expression. "Princess, I'm sorry." After saying that, 2 cavalrymen walked in front of Tuoya and forcefully brought her to the back of the troops. Without any obstruction, Suda rode on his horse and led the 20,000 cavalrymen forward. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he didn't speed up. On the surface, everything seemed normal. Tuoya had already said that there were less than 10,000 soldiers in the 5-star army. Among them, there were 4,000 infantrymen. In front of his 20,000 cavalrymen, this kind of strength was indeed not enough. On top of a pile of rocks, Yang Chandong gently put down his binoculars and a look of contempt flashed across his face. "Inform everyone to prepare for battle." Oh, this time, Beta Persei didn't object. He also used his binoculars to see the scene of Tuoya being forcefully taken away. Because of this, he also knew that everything was as the young master had predicted. This Mongol army that came from afar was not a friend, but an enemy. After the order was given and knowing that there was going to be a huge battle, whether it was the Nuzan cavalry or Tiger's Main's independent regiment, they all became excited. However, although the latter was excited, when he saw the 10 auxiliary troops that had just arrived, he couldn't help but scratch his head. Although they had war horses now, they didn't have time to adapt. If the cavalrymen and war horses didn't get used to each other and there wasn't enough communication, forcefully entering the battlefield was no different from courting death. They simply couldn't display their original strength. Don't distribute the horses anymore. Everyone, prepare the infantry formation and prepare to meet the enemy. Tiger's Main indeed gave the order. On the battlefield, cavalry wasn't necessarily stronger than infantrymen. Although this was the case in theory, it was best to choose the one that was suitable for oneself. Reluctantly giving up on the horses that were about to be theirs, the 10 battalions, a total of 4,000 soldiers of the independent regiment, began to form into battle formations. Each of them held spears that were specially designed to deal with cavalry, forming a square formation as they searched for a suitable place for them to fight. Yang Chandong still chose to fight at the short pile of rocks. He was indeed thankful for this kind of terrain. If it was a wide area, the enemy's 20,000 cavalrymen would be able to charge back and forth and break the formation of the 5-star army. At that time, even if they could obtain the final victory, who knew what kind of heavy price they would have to pay because of it? Of course, although the terrain was suitable, the opportunity was not within Yang Chandong's expectations. They just came out to take a short break and wanted to find a quiet place to rest for half a day. However, they did end up in a huge battle. The 5-star army that had just gone through a battle and hadn't had a good rest obviously hadn't fully recovered their strength. For the same reason, the Mongol army from Gobi also came from afar and didn't have a good rest after a night of rushing. In this comparison, it was a draw and no one would have a big advantage. The 20,000 Mongol cavalry were still slowly closing in. They were not in a rush and were approaching from afar. The distance between the two sides quickly shortened from 3 li to 2 li. When they were half a li away, Beta Persei was already in front of the Mongol army. My young master said that in front of us is our area. Please stop here, otherwise it will hurt the peace between both sides. Beta Persei rode on his horse and said with a loud voice. He had a loud voice to begin with, and without any restraint his voice traveled far and wide. At least at this moment, the armies on both sides could hear him clearly. The 5-star army actually discovered his army's intentions in time. This was somewhat out of head Suitor's expectations. He didn't know that Yang Qindong and the others were watching his every move with binoculars. He also didn't know that Yang Qindong, who had undergone lip-reading training, had already seen through every word he said. But this was no longer important. Since the other side was about to shed all pretense of cordiality, what was there to hesitate about? Head Suitor looked at Beta Persei and said, "This place has been our Mongol territory since ancient times. You Han people have already crossed the line by appearing here. What reason do you have for us to stop? It seems that your 5-star army is too arrogant. Do you really think that you are invincible just because you defeated the incompetent Halal? What a joke." After a burst of laughter, Head Suitor looked at Beta Persei again. His eyes were filled with killing intent. "And you actually dare to stand in front of this Khan. Do you know that you are playing with fire by doing this? Now that we are so close, I can capture you with a wave of my hand. Where do you think you're going to run?" Head Suitor's face was filled with anger and hatred as he spoke. Once upon a time, the Mongols were so mighty. Their ancestors had crossed the Eurasian continent, and no matter where they went, they had no opponents. It was because of the appearance of the great Ming dynasty that their legend of invincibility was broken. Emperor Zhu Di of the Ming dynasty personally led the army to attack the Mongols 5 times and suppress their former glory. Just based on this, he had no reason to be nice to the Han people. Perhaps in Head Suitor's heart, he had already classified the 5-star army as the Ming dynasty's army. Chapter 688. You want to capture me? Beta Persei had a look of disdain in the face of the arrogant Suitor. How about it? Do you still dare to resist? Suitor's face darkened when he saw that a small messenger of the enemy dared to show off in front of him. He was furious. Resist? Ha ha. This time, it was Beta Persei's turn to laugh. He didn't learn much from following Yang Qindong every day, but he did learn about 80% of his calmness and pretentiousness. The word resist is used by the weak against the strong. You're not the strong ones now, so the word resist is not appropriate. What I should say is, do you still resist? Believe it or not, we can bet that your people will never be able to get within 3 steps of me. Impudent. Suda had never been looked down upon like this before. Even someone of Agar Dorji's status would be polite to him. Even if he had a strong killing intent in his heart, he would not show any disrespect on his face. However, this foolish and boorish messenger had ignored him in front of so many people. Yes, he was stupid and crude. Otherwise, how could he be so blind and dare to threaten him at such a close distance? Although some people said that envoys were not killed in a war between 2 armies. But when one's strength reached a certain level, so what if one broke the rules? The rules were meant to be broken, weren't they? In a fit of rage, Suitor pointed his index finger at Beta Persei in front of him and said through gritted teeth, "Who's going to take him down for this Khan?" As soon as Suitor shouted, a guard behind him immediately responded, "Khan, leave this small fry to me to deal with." To be able to stand behind Suitor, he was either a general or a guard. But no matter which type it was, they were all very agile and vigorous. As soon as he finished speaking, a rider rushed out from the group and shouted at Beta Persei to approach him step by step. 10 steps, 8 steps, 6 steps, and he was getting closer and closer. On the other hand, Tiger's mane acted as if he didn't see anything. He stood there unhurriedly, allowing the other party to come closer, as if he didn't hear anything. 5 steps. 3 steps. The big hand had already reached out and was about to touch Beta Persei's body when suddenly, the sound of a horn rang out. The person who was rushing over lost his balance and fell to the ground with a plop. The man landed on the horse, causing the war horse to neigh. It seemed to be crying out for its master, but it also seemed to be summoning its master. Ah, it's a gun. Suda was indeed a Khan. He was experienced and knowledgeable. When the situation suddenly changed, he instinctively shouted and then quickly hid behind a few of his personal guards. When Huachong shouted, not only Suda Khan, even General Zamubala, who was known as the White Tiger, quickly hid behind a few of his personal guards and completely hid his body. Originally, they were aggressive and wanted to capture Beta Persei and punish him. But unexpectedly, the situation changed. The people they sent out died before they could even touch the corner of Beta Persei's clothes. This change shocked many of the Mongolian cavalry, especially the personal guards who were used as shields in front of them. Everyone's expression changed drastically. They were afraid that they would become the target in the next second and die on their horses. Ha! Ha! Beta Persei saw the Mongolian cavalry's reaction, and he laughed mockingly. Where's the person who spoke to me just now? Did he hide in his turtle shell like a tortoise? Ha ha! As the Khan of the Mongolian desert, when had Suitor ever been looked down upon like this? Beta Persei's shout was so loud that it was clearly a slap to his face. Even if he hid behind his personal guards, he still felt a burning pain on his face. On top of the short rocks, the black cavalry guards were standing with their spears. The shot just now was aimed at Yang Qindong's head and tail. At a distance of more than 700 meters, it was not easy to kill the enemy without hurting Beta Persei. Sixth young master, why didn't you finish off that old Khan Suitor just now? Xiao Vi, the captain of the first guard, asked with a puzzled expression as he looked at the enemy with his gun. Not only him, but the rest of the guards also listened attentively. They also did not understand the sixth young master's actions. However, Yang Qindong shook his head helplessly. Princess Oya once said that her father, Khan Suitor, has the bloodline of the Golden Family. Once such a person is killed, it's equivalent to fighting the entire Mongolian army to the death. Right now, we're not strong enough. If others don't provoke us, we don't need to kill them all. But if we kill this Suitor, we'll become enemies with the entire Mongolian army. Even if it's for our dignity, we won't be able to live in peace with them anymore. If Yang Qindong's goal was like Zhu Di's, which was to conquer the grasslands for the next few decades of peace in the Ming dynasty, of course, he would have directly killed Suitor just now. But his goal was much bigger than this. In order to resolve a momentary hatred, killing Suitor would cut off the possibility of cooperation with the entire Mongolian army. Clearly, the gains did not make up for the losses. On this side, Yang Qindong was still explaining the overall situation to the guards. On Beta Persei's side, he was still cursing. He really did not care about the fact that Suitor was a Khan. Where was Suitor's face? Being constantly mocked and ridiculed, Suitor's entire body was already trembling. He could not let the other party continue. Otherwise, his lifetime of wisdom would be destroyed in a day. It seemed that the other party already knew his intentions. Since that was the case, he would just have to force his way through. He did not believe that with his absolute advantage in numbers, he would not be able to destroy the other party. Beta Persei was still cursing. You're the ones who are ungrateful. Previously, my young master risked countless dangers to save your princess, and now you want to start a war with us? Everyone says that you Mongolians are born righteous, but what are you doing now? Where's your gratitude? Where's your sense of shame? Do you still have any shame? Bah! Even if we saved a dog, it would still know to wag its tail at us to express its gratitude. When we need them, they can even guard the house. But the person who saved you, you want to hurt your benefactor? Where's your bottom line? What's the difference between you and an animal? No, you're worse than an animal. I'm so angry. Suitor cannot hold back anymore. Suddenly, he shouted and interrupted Beta Persei's voice. Mongolian warriors, the other party used firearms just now. They are undoubtedly the Ming army. Thinking back, how many of our ancestors died in the hands of the Ming army? Now, the Ming dynasty is no longer the same as before. The Walla is fighting with them and has gained a certain advantage. They are no longer the world's strongest army. Now is the time for us to avenge our ancestors. Listen to my command, charge. Charge! General Zamubala also hid behind his bodyguard and shouted. When they were scolded by Beta Persei, many of the Mongolian soldiers lowered their heads, and the morale of the entire army dropped by a lot. Now that Suitor's shout mentioned the hatred of their ancestors, everyone's common hatred for the enemy was stimulated from the bottom of their hearts. Just as the order to charge was given, the 20,000 cavalrymen shouted and suddenly charged forward like a flood of fierce beasts. Oh my God! Beta Persei was still scolding to his heart's content when the enemy suddenly moved. He shouted and turned his horse around to leave. 1 against 10,000, no matter how strong he was, it was impossible for him to win. Beta Persei turned around and ran, accompanied by bursts of gunfire. As the bullets whistled through the air, the Mongolian cavalrymen charging at the front were shot down one by one. This hindered the enemy's attack and gave Beta Persei a chance and time to escape. Suitor, who was hiding behind his bodyguard, felt that the cavalrymen were being suppressed and could not help but shout, "Everyone, don't be afraid. Firearms are single-use items. Every shot counts. Everyone, charge together. They won't be able to hurt any of us. Charge, charge!" Everyone split the gold, silver, and horses in their hands. In order to raise morale, Suitor promised to split the spoils equally. As soon as he said this, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were still hesitating shouted and charged forward. In the face of enough benefits, even if there was danger, there were still people who would take the risk. On the pile of short rocks, Yang Qindong led the 2 bodyguards and kept firing bullets. One after another, the Mongolian cavalrymen fell on the road ahead. However, the cavalrymen were too fast. In the blink of an eye, they had rushed forward from the original distance of 1.5 miles. At that moment, their bows and arrows could already be fired. Yang Qindong and the bodyguards had no choice but to put on their masks to protect themselves. The arrows fell like rain. Compared to their fighting skills on horseback, the Mongolian cavalrymen who were known to have grown up on horseback performed very well. They were either riding on horseback, shooting arrows while climbing on horseback, or shooting arrows while hanging upside down from a golden hook. For a moment, arrows rained down like rain, landing on Yang Qindong and the others, producing a series of crackling sounds. Fire! Charge! Under the pile of short rocks, Yella led the Jurchens and started a fierce counterattack. The same arrows were shot out and landed among the Mongolian army, causing the cavalrymen to fall off their horses. Fire! Fire! At the independent regiment, Tiger's man ordered the 10 infantry battalions to fire arrows from afar. At the same time, he led 6 cavalry battalions into the designated area. He wanted to rely on the advantageous terrain and take advantage of the fact that the enemy could not fully deploy their forces to attack. In the process of charging, the vanguard of the Mongolian cavalrymen were first attacked by the Style 95 and then by the arrows. They suffered heavy losses. The general who led the team saw that they had lost more than 30% of their forces before they even reached the enemy. He had no choice but to change the direction of the assault. He no longer shot at Yang Qindong, but at the Jurchens. Yang Qindong's side became quiet again. "Look, is there anyone injured?" "Sixth young master, our armor is impenetrable. There are no injured members." Cho Wu and Dao Xiao, the 2 captains, checked the armor and reported. Chapter 689. Okay, then let's prepare to counterattack. Look carefully and shoot. We have to hit them until they can't even find north. Yang Qindong took off the Type 95 pistol from his back and reloaded it with a new magazine. Then he aimed and pulled the trigger. Beta Persei had already returned to the team and was also aiming with the Type 95 pistol. There were simply too many Mongol cavalry, and they were everywhere in sight. This made it so that they didn't need to aim too much. They just needed to fire based on their instincts, and often an enemy would be shot and fall off their horse. Although the number of guards was limited, wherever they aimed, the Mongolian army would be heavily injured. This greatly suppressed the enemy's morale and courage. Still hiding behind his bodyguard, Swade stared at the pile of short rocks with a face full of anger. He couldn't understand how the enemy's muskets were so powerful that they could shoot so many bullets and injure so many of his soldiers. No, we can't let them kill without any scruples. Men, send out 1,000 cavalry and charge forward. I don't care what method we use. We have to destroy these people. We can't let them become a threat. As soon as the Khan gave the order, a cavalry of 1,000 men charged towards the pile of rocks. They're finally here. Yang Shindong had already expected that the enemy would send troops to restrain him. He sneered, "Fire at them. I want to see if they're made of iron. Facing our bullets, will they be afraid?" It was only 1,000 cavalrymen, so Yang Shindong and the guards didn't really care about them. After everyone agreed in unison, they turned the muzzles and aimed at the charging cavalrymen and pulled the trigger. As gunshots rang out, countless cavalrymen fell off their horses. Although they charged very quickly, they still lost more than half of their forces in the process. Put away your guns. Attack. Seeing that the enemy was less than 100 meters away from him, Swade immediately shouted. Yang Qindong immediately put the 95 style on his back and pulled out his cavalry saber. With a shout, he rushed towards the pile of short rocks. Along with him were more than 100 black cavalry guards. They charged down like ferocious tigers. With their sturdy armor, it was as if they had entered an unstoppable state. They could cut down and kill whoever they wanted. The Mongolian cavalry fell off their horses one after another. Streams of blood flew out and dyed the sabers red. The setting sun was like blood. The Nuzan cavalry had already been surrounded by the Mongol vanguard. Both sides were engaged in a bloody battle. Dust flew up once again, and the only thing that could be heard were the roars and shouts of killing. As the Mongolian general, Kamubala didn't choose the Nuzan cavalry as his opponent. With the idea of picking the weakest among them, he set his sights on the 10 infantry battalions of the independent regiment. The advantage of cavalry against infantry was quite obvious. Looking from afar, infantry didn't have the mobility of cavalry. They formed a square formation with 400 men. They formed a tight square formation with black shields around them to protect their own safety. Outside the square formation, there were rows of barricades. It was as if they were telling the cavalry not to provoke them, or they would be hurt. "Let's kill these infantry first," Zamubala said bluntly. Clearly, he didn't care about the formation of the infantrymen. The cavalry behind him was already eager to give it a try. The sabers in their hands were also ready to taste blood. As soon as the order was given, they would engulf and drown the infantry phalanx in an overwhelming manner. "Kill!" Zamubala raised the saber in his hand, and a crazed expression appeared on his face. He opened his mouth wide and swung his right arm forward. His legs clamped down hard, and the warhorse under him leaped forward as if their hearts were connected. In front of the infantry formation, there were hundreds of shield-wielding soldiers. They tried their best to hide behind the 1-meter-tall iron shields. When the cavalry launched their attack, waves of arrows fell on the shields like raindrops. Crackling sounds could be heard. When the cavalry attacked the infantry, they would use bows and arrows to kill them. If used well, a wave of arrows could often severely injure the enemy. When the cavalry truly arrived, the morale of the army would be crushed. In other words, the infantry could only passively defend against the cavalry's attack. It was as natural as a cat eating a mouse. However, when the 5-star army was involved in this matter, it was a completely different matter. Only defending and not attacking wasn't their habit. Split. After seeing the shield-bearers block the enemy's first wave of arrows, the battalion commanders of each infantry phalanx shouted out loud. The originally airtight, square formation suddenly split into two from the middle. In the middle of the square formation, there were hundreds of musketeers. Some of them were lying on the ground, some were half squatting, and some were standing. They were divided into several echelons and formed a unique scenery. Fire! 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 When the battalion commander gave the order to attack with a hoarse roar, the 100 gunmen with Type 81 rifles began to spit out their own tongues of fire. As the gunshots rang out, the enemy riders fell to the ground one by one in coordination with the sound of the gunshots. Since they were prepared, the Mongol cavalry were caught off guard. Some of them were just brandishing their sabers when they were shot in the chest. Some of them had just jumped over the barricades when they were shot in midair along with their horses. Some of them were running with their heads down when they felt a sharp pain in their chest and fell off their horses with a plop. Even more of them had lost their lives before they could even figure out what had happened. Even if they were dead, their horses were still running forward without them knowing. Luckily, the dense barricades were effective. In the end, without the guidance of their owners, the war horses were forced to stop in front of the barricades. The musketeers were the original auxiliary soldiers. The current independent regiment was built on the foundation of the 6 auxiliary battalions. In other words, there were more than 2,000 auxiliary soldiers who knew how to use guns well. Now, there were only 10 infantry formations, and each formation only had 100 gunners. It was easy to gather them. This was also the trump card that Tiger Edge had prepared when training the infantry of the independent regiment. Now that it was used, it brought about an astonishing power and effect. The 1,000 auxiliary soldiers each held a Type 81 rifle that was much more powerful than the Type 81 rifles of this era. When the sound of gunshots rang out and the enemy cavalry was killed one by one on their horses, it was a shocking sight. Even the soldiers of the other independent regiments who were captured during the Battle of Liaohe were shocked by the strength of the auxiliary soldiers. It wasn't that they hadn't seen muskets before. In fact, because they were all comrades, they had even seen them up close. It was just that before they became auxiliary soldiers, they didn't even have the right to touch a gun. Because of this, many of their comrades were angry. They thought, "What are you guys so proud of? Isn't it just muskets? The Great Ming Empire already has these things in their army." However, when they saw and experienced everything, they were still shocked. They were both muskets, but there were obviously too many differences. For example, the stability, continuity, lethality, and so on. Although they only served in the newer Gandusi region and didn't have the chance to come into contact with muskets, they could still feel the difference between the muskets in their comrades' hands and the Great Ming Empires. This was because if the Great Ming Empire had muskets with such lethality, with their advantage in numbers, would there be anyone who could be their opponent? The Divine Arms Battalion. Zamubala's face, which was as red as blood, showed a horrified expression. Decades ago, the Great Ming Empire relied on the muskets of the Divine Arms Battalion to defeat their ancestors. After all these years, they originally thought that the Great Ming Empire had been divided into the north and the south. They originally thought that Baiming was an arrow at the end of its flight after the incident at the Tumu Fortress. It was time for the Mongolians to rise again. But now, when they saw the scene of thousands of muskets firing at the same time, they knew that the misfortune of the Mongolians had arrived again. It was just a charge, but they lost thousands of cavalrymen. These were all the good men of the Mongolians in the Gobi Desert. They all had families, brothers, and sisters. Now that they had all died in battle here, how was he going to explain it? Zamubala felt like he had punched an iron plate. He originally thought that it would be an easy move to use cavalry to deal with infantry. But now, they had suffered heavy losses before they could even charge over. If they continued to fight, how many of their brothers would they have to lose before they could obtain a victory? They were no longer as arrogant as before, nor were they as confident as before. Zamubala wanted to pass on what happened here to the Khan. How could their 20,000 cavalrymen deal with such a powerful enemy who possessed firearms? Zamubala felt a headache coming on. Khan Sud also felt a headache coming on. It was not because of anything else, but because a scout had reported that a large number of cavalrymen had suddenly appeared on both sides of them. Although they could not see the situation of the other party, they should be enemies and not friends. Why are there still enemies? Didn't Tuoya say that the five-star army has less than 10,000 soldiers? Khonsu's expression changed from the confident look he had before. He started to feel conflicted. He believed that even if the enemies that appeared on both sides were on the same side as the five-star army, with his 20,000 Mongolian soldiers, he did not have to worry about losing. But after spending so much effort, and in the end, sacrificing 800 of his own men to kill 1,000 of his enemies, just to fight a bloody battle with a five-star army that he didn't have much hatred for. Was it worth it? What was his goal? Just as he was conflicted over this question, one of Zamubala's soldiers ran over. Khan, something bad happened. The enemy has the Divine Arms Battalion. The Divine Arms Battalion. What's the matter? Why are you making such a big fuss? Khonsu was already in a bad mood. When he was shouted, his expression became even worse. Isn't it just the Divine Arms Battalion? I already know. Chapter 690. Of course, Suda knew. Previously, when Beta Persei came over to persuade them not to act rashly, he fired his flintlock, which gave the other party a chance to escape. Flintlocks were indeed one of the nemeses of cavalry, but it was only effective when there were a lot of them. Seeing that Sud Khan didn't seem to pay attention to his shouts, the bodyguard thought for a moment and realized where the problem was. Thus, he shouted again, "Khan, it's thousands of Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion. They all have powerful flintlocks in their hands. General Zamubala has suffered heavy losses after charging several times." This time, the problem was finally explained clearly, and Suda's expression became more and more unsightly. What? Thousands of Great Ming's Divine Machine Battalion? That must be the Divine Machine Battalion. My God, how is this the five-star army? It's clearly the main force of the Great Ming Dynasty. How do we end up fighting against them? Finally, Suda realized how stupid of a decision he had made. He actually treated the main force of the Great Ming Dynasty as a soft persimmon. When he thought of the scene of the Great Ming Dynasty sweeping through the grassland decades ago, he felt a chill in his bones. Quickly go and tell General Zamubala to retreat, since they already knew the true situation of the five-star army, and more importantly, they knew that the enemy had a powerful weapon like the Divine Strategy Battalion. In that case, there was no need for them to continue fighting. If they continued fighting, they would only suffer even greater losses. Looking at the somewhat chaotic battlefield and the dust that filled the sky, no matter how unwilling Suda was, he still made a very unwilling order. Passed down the order, "All troops retreat." Finally, the order to retreat was issued. Hearing this, the soldier who passed down the order breathed a sigh of relief for some reason. He was also a cavalryman who had experienced countless battles, but he had never paid such a heavy price in such a short period of time like today. It hadn't even been 2 hours since the start of the war, but as far as he knew, the number of cavalrymen who died in the battle had already reached 3,000. This was still the number of Mongolian soldiers who couldn't be counted. Now, no matter how big the smoke was, it would be difficult to calm down until the result was clear. Even if they lost 3,000 cavalry in 2 hours, it was not a pain that the Mongol army could bear. The five-star army's reinforcements were about to arrive. Retreating now was the wisest choice. The messenger replied loudly and turned around to pass on the message. For a period of time, regardless of whether it was the Mongolian cavaliers who were fiercely attacking Yang Chindong's cavaliers at the pile of short rocks, or Kambala's men who wanted to take advantage of the situation and use their cavaliers to fight against the infantrymen, when they received the news, all of them sighed in relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Then they ordered their army to retreat. Zamubala wanted to take advantage of the situation, but didn't succeed. Seeing that the situation wasn't good, he wanted to retreat. How could Tiger's Mane give in? Previously, when Zamubala was dealing with the infantry, he didn't have any intention of helping out with the 6 cavalry battalions. This was because he believed in the strength of the infantry battalions. He knew how powerful these infantry battalions were with Type 81 guns. Now that the other party had suffered a loss and was afraid, It was time for him to take advantage of the situation. Come on, cavalry warriors of the independent regiment. It's time for us to perform. Charge with your regiment commander. Tiger's Mane acted just like how he dealt with Hilaruo's cavaliers. He was the first to charge forward on his horse. Following behind him were 6 battalions, more than 2,000 cavalry warriors with sharp sabers in their hands. They had been conserving their energy at the side. Now that it was finally time for them to act, how could they be courteous? All of them fought to be the first to charge forward and kill the enemy. At the pile of short rocks, the Mongolian cavaliers used various methods to try to surround Yang Chendong's troops. However, after all of them failed, they finally became obedient. Facing the mouth, nose, and eyes that could be injured, they were all helpless. Luckily, the messenger passed on a new order. The Khan ordered the army to retreat. Instantly, everyone heaved a sigh of relief. They didn't stop and turn around to leave. Young master, they are retreating. Beside Yang Chendong, Beta Persei, who was already covered in blood from all the killing, panted heavily as he spoke with a look of satisfaction. It was no wonder that Beta Persei had such a reaction. When he was by the young master's side in the past, he was always worried about the dangers on the front lines. Under normal circumstances, he would be at the command center. This time, relying on the advantage of the black armor and the might of the warhorse, he had finally reached the front lines. Now that he could kill to his heart's content, how could he not be carefree? They're going to escape, but can they escape? Raise the command flag. Order the cavaliers to strengthen the 1st and 2nd Regiment to intercept the Mongolian cavaliers. This time, if we don't skin them alive, they can forget about escaping from the hands of this young master. Yang Chendong's eyes flashed with determination. Long before the Mongolian army appeared, the 1st and 2nd Regiment had already rushed to the pile of rocks. However, Yang Chendong didn't let them enter the battlefield immediately. He needed to leave behind a group of fresh troops to face any difficulties and unknown dangers. Since the enemy had retreated, it was naturally time to use their backup plan. Since they had chosen to be his enemy and his warning didn't work, then they had to be prepared for any serious consequences. On the pile of rocks, the command flag was raised high, conveying the 6th Young Master's order. Outside the battlefield, Windchaser and Lujua had received the order and brought a total of 5,200 cavaliers to prepare to stop the enemy. Not long after Sud Khan gave the order to retreat, Zamubala and the others brought the army back. Compared to when they went to battle, they were naturally in a much more difficult situation. All right, the Han people have a good saying. Victory and defeat are common in war. This time, we lost, but as long as we preserve our strength, we can get it back in the next battle. Now, everyone prepare to retreat. Sud Khan's eyes scanned all the generals and said with a helpless and sorrowful voice, Khan, we still have many cavaliers that haven't returned from the battlefield. Are we waiting? Zamubala looked back at the 4,000 cavaliers that were still fighting in the dust and asked hesitantly when he heard that they were going to retreat now. We're not waiting anymore. Everything depends on their fate. To tell you the truth, a large number of the 5-star army has appeared behind us. Even if we go back now, we have to be prepared to be intercepted. All right, let's not delay any longer and leave now. To be able to become a Khan, one had to have a strong will. A loss was a loss. The most important thing was how to preserve the greatest strength in the face of a loss. As for sacrificing some people, although he felt some pain in his heart, he didn't even blink his eyes. The Khan had a strong will. Furthermore, they knew that the 5-star army was approaching from behind. Who would say anything else? They immediately started to retreat. Zamubala received the order, and together with Bao Yin, each led 5,000 cavalrymen to meet Zhue Feng and Lujua's troops who wanted to intercept them. Suyu led 2,000 cavaliers and his daughter, Tuoya, through the battlefield and returned from the northeast direction. Although the Mongol army had an absolute advantage in numbers, they still paid the price of 2,000 cavaliers before retreating when they faced the 1st and 2nd Regiment that had been looking forward to a big battle. This was because the 6th Young Master's flag had clearly stated that they shouldn't chase a cornered enemy. Otherwise, if they were bitten by them, they might have to pay twice the price. Sud Khan retreated, or it could be said that he had escaped. The remaining 4,000 cavaliers that were fighting the Nuzen cavalry did not know about this. The commander of the independent regiment, Tiger's Mane, was ordered to bring 6 battalions of soldiers into the battle. After some instructions, the Nuzen cavalry retreated from the battlefield, leaving only 2,000 Mongol cavaliers searching for their opponents. The 1st and 2nd Regiment also came to the main battlefield. Along with them were the 2,000 war horses that they had just captured, as well as 200 captured Mongol cavaliers. 1st Regiment Jue Feng reporting to the 6th Young Master. 2nd Regiment Commander Lu Jua reporting to the 6th Young Master. Good, you guys came the right time. Regiment Commander Lu called Battalion Commander Teimu over. Yang Shindong nodded at the 2 regimental commanders who had just arrived. He then called out 3rd Battalion Commander Teimu. 3rd Battalion Commander, come over. The 6th Young Master is looking for you. Lu Jua turned around and shouted. Under everyone's envious gazes, Teimu jumped off his horse and ran over to Yang Shindong. 2nd Regiment Commander Teimu greets the 6th Young Master. He gave a somewhat awkward military salute. Although it was not standard, it was obvious that this Mongol general was trying his best to adapt to the 5-star Army's military rules. He returned the salute and lowered his hand. After Teimu lowered his hand, Yang Shindong pointed at the battlefield. There are about 2,000 Mongol cavaliers here. I'll give you a chance. You can convince as many of them as you want to live. If you don't want to surrender, then you can die. Do you understand? Understood, 6th Young Master. Teimu's body trembled. When he understood what the 6th Young Master meant, he immediately gave a solemn military salute. As a Mongol, he naturally did not want to see his comrades die in front of him. Hence, he would do his best to complete this task. Without their opponents, the Mongolian cavaliers became quiet. Gradually, the dust in the air around them finally settled down, and everything that happened on the battlefield was clearly displayed before everyone's eyes. The 2,000 Mongol cavaliers who thought that they had killed all their opponents wanted to cheer in unison for victory. However, when they could clearly see what was happening around them, they saw countless arrows aimed at their chests. At that moment, many of them revealed panicked expressions. What's going on? Where's our Khan? Where's our Mongol army? Don't tell me they were all killed. Chapter 691. That's not possible. Our Khan is so wise. Our Mongolian army has so many people and is so strong. It's impossible for anything to happen to them. All right, can't you see? The number of enemies has increased again. They must have defeated the Khan. The Khan must have given up on us and left us. Then what should we do? Fight them to the death? That's right. What should we do? After the truth came to light, all sorts of discussions could be heard. However, they were all speaking in Mongolian, so they couldn't affect the 5-star Army's cavalry that surrounded them. Of course, even if they could understand their language, the iron discipline of the soldiers did not allow them to have any other thoughts. Everyone quieted down. Just as the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers did not know where to go, a loud Mongolian voice rang out in everyone's ears. Teimu rode on his horse like a lion patrolling its territory and appeared in front of the surrounded Mongolian soldiers. Behind Teimu were 2 other carriages. One of the carriages was filled with a mountain of silver and many iron pots, bowls, and other daily necessities. There were also jars of unopened wine. The other carriage was filled with shiny cavalry swords and sharp feathered bows. There was also black armor that gave off a dark and bloodthirsty glow. The moment the 2 carriages appeared, they attracted the attention of the 2,000 Mongolian soldiers. During the Great Ming Dynasty, the Mongolians fought for iron pots because they did not have them. It was not because iron pots were a luxury. Furthermore, the Mongolians did not have the skills and materials to forge iron pots. Without iron pots, they could not cook meat. At that time, the Great Ming Dynasty was afraid that the Mongolians would buy iron pots and forge them into weapons. Therefore, the Mongolians could only snatch iron pots. As a result, A group of fully armed Mongolian soldiers would often harass the Han people just to snatch an iron pot. It was quite a comical scene. Temu was a Mongolian. He was very clear about what the Mongolians needed and desired. Instead of trying to persuade or reason with these people, it would be better to give them something tangible and give them what they desired the most. Noticing the greed and excitement in the eyes of the Mongolian cavalrymen, Temu knew that he had made the right move. With confidence, he said loudly, "Do you see that? As long as you're willing to surrender and join the 5-star army, all of these things will be yours. Not only that, you'll also be able to receive a decent amount of money every month. If you perform meritorious deeds on the battlefield, you'll even receive additional rewards. It can be said that the 5-star army has many good things that no one can imagine. You are all brave warriors. The 6th young master because he respects you." Of course, if anyone wants to be unconventional and want to repay your Khan's kindness with death, you can also take out your saber and stand out. I will stand right here and will not move an inch. If you have the ability, then just kill me. At this point, Temu took the initiative to pause for a moment before saying, "Of course, you have to think it through before you act. If you draw your sabers, you might die before me. As long as you've made up your mind, you can do it." "All right, I'm afraid you don't know what happened just now. Your Khan Sud fled when he realized that he was no match for my 5-star army. I didn't tell you anything. I have to say, you are all abandoned children. I really feel sorry for you. For a Khan like this, is there any need for you to serve him? Isn't it too worth it?" When Temu finished speaking, there were still a few Mongolian soldiers who wanted to test his saber with their own bodies. Some of them had received Sud's kindness. If it wasn't for this Khan, their lives would be very difficult. However, when they heard the last sentence and heard that Sud had abandoned them, the Mongolian soldiers who wanted to step forward and show their loyalty hesitated. It was not worth it to risk their lives for a Khan who abandoned them. None of the Mongolian soldiers rushed forward. This was within Temu's expectations. The 5-star army soldiers were all around them. Unless they didn't want to live anymore, who would take the initiative to rush out and die? Good. Since no one objects, I will take it that you have chosen to surrender. Now, I will ask the warriors in the west to throw their weapons on the ground, dismount, and surrender. Everyone else, follow. I only want to say that we are very sincere. If anyone wants to play tricks with us, you can try using your own life." After Temu said this, he looked at the soldiers in the west and said, "You have 3 breaths. If you don't surrender immediately, don't blame us for being impolite. 1, 2. Finally, under Temu's slow and drawn-out voice, a Mongolian cavalryman threw down the saber in his hand and jumped down from his warhorse. Holding the reins of his warhorse, he was the first to walk out. Surrendering was equivalent to letting go of all their dignity. If it was any other time, who knew how many people would laugh at him? However, they didn't. In the face of life and death, especially when the person they were dying for was not worth it, they wisely chose to survive. Only by surviving would a person have hope, a future, and the possibilities of the future. Riding on the white dragon horse and standing on a pile of rocks, Yang Chundong took in all of this with a natural smile on his face. "Beta Persei, come here." "Young master." Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, came to Yang Chundong's side. "Go ahead and return to the main camp. Tell your logistics team to prepare the food. Also, prepare more silver, wine, cigarettes, and sabers. This young master wants to celebrate. Also, send a telegram to Tsushin City when you return. Tell them to quickly transport the next batch of resources I want. I want as much as you can. Don't think it's too much." Yang Chindong chuckled. "Yes, young master." Beta Persei naturally nodded in agreement. However, out of worry, he still asked, "Young master, are the resources still being transported by sea?" "Yes, just like last time." Yang Chindong nodded. After the continuous battles, the strength of the 5-star army had increased tremendously. At this moment, when they were added to the newer Gandusi region, there was naturally nothing to worry about. It would be best if they didn't provoke him. If they dared to provoke him, He didn't mind teaching them how to be an honest person. Beta Persei led a small group of people straight to the main camp. After the Mongolian cavalry put down their weapons, handed over their horses, and became infantry, they followed the main force of the 5-star army back to the main camp dozens of miles behind them. At this moment, the sun was about to set and a touch of red hung on the horizon. Looking at this scene, Yang Qindong couldn't help but sing heroically. The sun sets in the west, and the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers return to the camp from their target practice. The red flowers on their chests reflect. Yang Qindong's singing naturally inspired the 100 black cavalry guard around him. They also sang the song, coming back from target practice. After them, the independent regiment also sang loudly. It was mainly the soldiers from the 6 auxiliary battalions that had already been defeated. When these thousands of people shouted, it caused a huge commotion. It attracted the other regiments and battalions to sing as well. However, they had never heard this kind of military song before. They didn't know what the lyrics were or how to sing it. They could only sing along. Zhuai Feng, Lu Zhua, and Yella's expressions didn't look too good, especially Commander Lu Zhua. He had once been the commander of the auxiliary regiment and taught the soldiers how to sing military songs. But now, not many of his soldiers knew how to sing. He felt his face burning. He thought that after tonight, if he had the chance, he would definitely teach the soldiers how to sing. This would increase the morale of the soldiers and would be extremely useful and beneficial for the unity of the soldiers. Amidst the singing, under the setting sun, the army returned. The army was huge and winding like a dragon that had appeared out of nowhere. It was destined to break the tranquility of the grassland. The main force of the army had finally returned to the main camp. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front finally sent news that they had gone to do some hidden training. As Yangxie's army continued to grow, as the most elite of the Cold Front division, they also felt the pressure on their bodies increasing. It was also because of this hidden training that they didn't receive news of the army's battle in time. Fortunately, even without the Cold Front division, the 5-star army strength was already very strong. Especially in this battle, the Nuzen cavalry had performed very well. Although they had lost more than 1,000 cavalry in 2 consecutive battles, how could there be no deaths in a battle? Moreover, the number of soldiers that they lost could be re-enlisted from the captives. This was originally what Yang Qindong had promised the regimental commanders. Beta Persei came back early. The logistics battalion had already started cooking. The smell of meat spread everywhere, causing the 5-star army soldiers who had been fighting for a day and night to open their eyes wide. They couldn't help but swallow their saliva. Same old rules. Wash your hands clean before eating. After the meal, we will reward you according to your contributions and distribute the rewards. Yang Qindong boldly leapt onto the white dragon horse and laughed heartily as he spoke. His laughter also attracted the cheers of the soldiers. The meat was large, and there was enough rice. After all, they were still in a state where they could face the enemy at any time. Thus, everyone couldn't drink as much as they wanted. Each person could only drink 2 taels. But even so, many of the soldiers still had a satisfied look on their faces and ate until their mouths were full of oil. And if they could smoke a cigarette after eating, it would definitely be a life comparable to that of a god. Who knew how many soldiers slowly closed their eyes because of this in a state of enjoyment? Chapter 692. After the 2 battles, they had taken over 1,000 Tatar prisoners and another 3,000 Mongolian prisoners. These 4,000 people were still in the captive camp. They were lucky enough to see the 5-star army having a meal. In that era, it was not easy for soldiers to have a full meal. Usually, they would only have such an opportunity before a great battle, or when they had won a great battle and rewarded the army with a great victory. But even so, not all soldiers were able to enjoy such treatment. Generally speaking, a general would naturally have enough food to eat. The personal guards of the general could eat until they were 70% full, and the regular soldiers, the elites who charged at the front during battle, could eat until they were 60% full. As for the other soldiers, it was already considered good if they could eat until they were 50% full. It was often shown on television that the Mongolian army would eat mutton wherever they went. It was very appetizing. However, that was only for the generals. Normal soldiers could not enjoy such treatment. The soldiers could pick up the leftovers from the general's table. They could even chew on the bones. Normal soldiers could not even think about it. The people of that era were really poor. They only had 2 meals a day. Being able to fill their stomachs was already not bad. However, what they saw today was that almost all of the 5-star army soldiers, no matter if they were generals or normal soldiers, no matter if they were in charge of logistics, they could all eat until they were full. Even the captives who had not made up their minds had food placed in front of them so that they could eat as much as they wanted. This scene after scene shocked the captives. Some of the Mongolian soldiers who were smart among the captives took the initiative to greet some of the friendly Mongolian soldiers who were also part of the 5-star army. They used the chance to get close to them and ask some questions that they did not understand. All right, we all know what you guys are thinking. Let me tell you, in the 5-star army, as long as we fight and train hard, we do not need to worry about food and drink. Not only that, after we eat and drink, we still have food for our minds. Look, this thing in my hand. Look, it can smoke. It is called a cigarette. What is a cigarette? Is it tasty? The Mongolian captives who saw it for the first time were interested. Of course you can't eat it. This thing is for sucking and smoking. Look at me. While speaking, the soldiers of the 5-star army took a light puff of their cigarettes. Then, they put the cigarette into their mouths. After inhaling a portion of it, they slowly spat out a portion of it. They looked extremely satisfied. Aya, this thing is very interesting. Can you give me one to try? One of the captive soldiers asked curiously. That won't do. This thing isn't for normal use. It can only be earned during military exploits. In this battle, I killed 4 enemies and injured 1. According to the rules, I can get 45 cigarettes, which is more than 2 packs. If I save some, it will be enough for me to live freely for a while. Haha. After saying this, the warrior turned around and left. It was as if his spoils of war would be snatched away by the captives if he stayed. One by one, the 5-star army veterans were called over by the captives. After showing off for a while, they turned around and left. Did you think that these veterans were so kind as to chat with the captives? They were only doing so because they had military orders and wanted to satisfy their vanity. However, it was this kind of teaching that greatly stimulated the captives who had no choice but to lower their heads. Originally, they had no choice but to surrender in order to survive. But now, it seemed that there was no harm in surrendering. It might even be a new hope in life. Yang Qindong didn't care about the captives. He firmly believed that the environment could change a person. His attention was focused on the situation in front of him. This time, he had defeated the Mongolian army with a large number of firearms. Presumably, the news of him coming to the prairie could no longer be hidden. In addition, he had defeated Horror's 5,000 cavalry. In the outside world, there should be a lot of people paying attention to him. Since that was the case, he might as well not play hide and seek and stand out. Since he was going to make it public, Yang Qindong decided to take his first step in the prairie and build a city. Regardless of whether it was for the sake of logistical supplies or for the treatment of the injured and the expansion of their influence in the future, a stable city was a must. After standing in front of the sand table for a long time, he pointed to the land of Arakamaki that he had been studying for a long time. Arakamaki, in the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, Shi, E, and Ji run Gaole. According to Chindi's book, Emperor Taizu wrote, Arakamaki Wandong, Lujina Tunshin, Mir Sudaw, Hahai Laoyan, Ajar Havandu, Haleoj Lu, and other places. Thou shalt reside there. From these records, Arakamaki was located in the easternmost part. Occupying this place was equivalent to having a residence. Moreover, it was also very close to the Biming realm. In the future, no matter where he decided to extend his tentacles, it would be much more convenient. Most importantly, with a foundation, no matter what he did in the future, he would have fewer worries. What kind of people are there in Arakamaki? Pointing to the sand table, Yang Qindong asked Su Yunsheng, who was standing by the side. Reporting to the 6th young master, there are only about 500 Tatar cavalry there. You also know that the relationship between Baiming and the Walla is very tense. The closer we get to them, the more scarce our resources are. In order to survive, many of the people here have already moved away. Now, other than the cavalry, there are only about 1,000 Mongolian people. 1,000 people? That's too little. When we need to build a city, I'm afraid we won't even be able to find workers. However, this is the only thing we can do, right? You've been to Arakamaki, right? How was the environment there? Although Yang Qindong felt a little regretful, how could there be anything perfect in the world? Su Yinsheng hurriedly nodded. Yes, young master, I've been there. There were originally walls there. Later on, when Ming Qingzu went north to conquer the grasslands, it was repaired. The foundation is not bad, and the area it occupies is not small. Once there are enough resources, there shouldn't be a problem to build a large city. Good. Tonight you will lead the reconnaissance team to take over Arakamaki, then announce to the outside world that it is the territory of our mercenaries. Yang Qindong nodded, his aura becoming very firm. He had fought with the Tatar and Mongol tribes separately, and it had attracted the attention of many people. If he did not immediately send troops to take over Arakamaki, even if it was to monitor him, it would be occupied by other forces. At that time, if he wanted to take over Arakamaki, he would have to fall out with one of the parties. Before he had a sufficient foundation, it would be best to avoid war if he could. If the Vala, Tatar, Mongol, or even the Northern Ming dynasty allied together to attack him, he was afraid that he would be exhausted to death with the few people he had. Yang Qindong gave the order, and Su Yinsheng did not ask any questions. He nodded and agreed. Yes, after dark, our reconnaissance team will move out. Tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, this news will be spread all over the grasslands. Good, you can go. Call the 3rd Division Commander Wu Sheng and Political Commissar Chen Bo over. Yang Qindong did not even raise his head and continued to look at the sand table in front of him, as if he had thought of something. After a while, the 2 senior officers of the 3rd Division of the Cold Front appeared in Yang Qindong's tent. How is it? Are you feeling regretful that you didn't get to fight the last battle? As soon as he saw the 2 young officers with the rank of senior colonel, Yang Qindong pointed at them and asked jokingly. Hiding in the grassland was different from hiding in the forest. Without the protection of trees, hiding in the open grassland would naturally require a higher level of training for a cavalry unit to be able to launch a sudden attack. However, under Yang Qindong's theoretical guidance, Wu Sheng and Chen Bo still did as they were told. They had already achieved some results. It was still difficult to hide a division in the open grasslands, but it was possible to hide a company or even a battalion. Just think about it. When both sides were about to fight, a powerful enemy cavalry suddenly charged out from ground. It was self-evident what the outcome of the battle would be. Thus, even though the 3rd Division of the Cold Front didn't make it to the last battle, they did not regret it. This was because they knew that the 6th young master's ambitions were far-reaching. There would be more battles to fight in the future. As long as they could train their troops to become stronger, there would be no lack of opportunities for them to perform. There are some regrets, but we believe that gold will shine. The 3rd Division of the Cold Front will always be the strongest cavalry unit. Political Commissar Chen Bo chuckled and said confidently, Yes, the 3rd Division of the Cold Front will always be the strongest. Commander Wu Sheng said with even more confidence. His expression was filled with determination. Good. Seeing the confidence of his 2 subordinates, Yang Qindong was very happy. His subordinates had to have this kind of spirit. They had to be invincible. Only this kind of army could become a true elite unit. Only this kind of army could win every battle. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with Wu Sheng and Chen Bo's attitude. Then, he began to assign tasks. It's like this. This time, I will teach you a very important and difficult mission. Cross the Daxing and mountain range, cross the Liao River and Songhua River to reach Haitown. There, you will receive a large amount of military resources from Crimson City and rush back here. Pointing at the location on the sand table, Yang Qindong said, "I want the 3rd Division to be like Monkey Sun this time. Create havoc in the sky and make the Biming army in the new Gan district not dare to say anything. If they try to stop you, you can use the banner of loyalty. If they still dare to stop you, you can teach them a lesson. How about it? Any questions?" Chapter 693. In order to establish a foothold in a place, military supplies and logistics were always the most important. Humans couldn't live without eating, drinking, and defecating. In an environment like the grasslands where everything was lacking, it was obviously unrealistic to obtain materials locally. They could only rely on transportation. Opening up a sufficiently safe logistical path was one of the most important things at the moment. After thinking about it, Yang Qindong finally chose the new Gan metropolis for this logistical path. Although there were many Biming army stations there, they'd been closed off for a long time and didn't have enough strength. Such an army wasn't difficult to deal with. As long as the 3 divisions completed their mission well, they were completely confident that they could open up a safe passage. As long as there were no problems with logistics, Yang Qindong was confident that he could build a new city in the grasslands in the shortest time possible. A new city with great influence and far-reaching influence. When that time came, conquering the forces in this area would be twice the result with half the effort. As for how to intimidate the Biming army stations in the new Gan metropolis with thunderous might, Yang Qindong thought about it and finally decided that the task would fall on the 3 divisions of the Lungfeng division. This was currently the strongest army under his command. Only they could have a powerful deterrent effect. In the face of such a powerful force, any schemes and tricks would be useless. Without waiting for the 2 divisions to make a decision, Yang Qindong added, "This mission is extremely important. If you have any questions, you can raise them. But once you agree, you must complete the mission perfectly. This cannot be discounted at all. Once the mission is completed, I will record it as a great merit. If the mission is not completed well, or if there are any accidents with the supplies, then you should prepare to be demoted. You will be directly sent to Beta Persei's logistics camp to be a cook." This was a complete demotion. Making a division commander a cook, this kind of punishment could be said to be heavy. Wu Sheng and Chun Bo couldn't help but be stunned, but they quickly recovered and said in unison, "Sixth young master, please don't worry. We will definitely complete the mission perfectly. If we can't do it well, we don't need to be cooks anymore. We'll just offer our heads." Wu Sheng was a standard soldier. The bigger the battle, the more excited he was. It was understandable that he would say something like that. It was also in line with his usual style of doing things. As a political commissar, Chun Bo was full of scholarly aura. Unexpectedly, he could say such words, which surprised Yang Qindong. He looked at the 2 of them carefully and nodded after a long time. "Okay, I'll remember your words." Young Master Ben is looking forward to your next performance. Pack up and leave early tomorrow morning. Chun Bo's performance really made Yang Qindong's eyes light up. He even thought that since this person's character was so determined, then he should test him a little more. If there were no problems, then this person could be trained as a military supervisor in the future. It seemed like a waste for such a hot-blooded officer to become a political cadre. Chun Bo didn't know that his performance in Yang Qindong's eyes would give birth to such a realization. After he and Wu Sheng gave a standard military salute, he left the command tent and called for an emergency meeting with the officers of the 3 divisions. After the 2 of them left, Yang Qindong's eyes fell on the map again. His eyes still fell on Arikamaki, the old city built by the great Ming dynasty in the grasslands. He imagined that after tonight's reconnaissance battalion took action, this city would belong to him. It would also become his first strong force in the grasslands. At this moment, he even thought of a name for this new city. Since it was going to start here, then it would be called the First City. Arikamaki, this city that had been abandoned by the great Ming dynasty, and who knew how many times it had changed owners, now looked extremely desolate. There were no traces of people walking around in the city at all. Only the dilapidated walls could be seen from time to time, and one could imagine the former glory of this place. It wasn't the first time Su Yunxing came here, but for tonight's military operation, he once again disguised himself and appeared here. In order to not attract attention, he only brought 2 of his trusted aides and the reconnaissance battalion's 1st company commander, Yinda battalion commander. There are only 500 enemy cavalry and 1,000 Mongolian civilians. If we want to take over this place, why do we need to be so careful? I just need to move out and the mission will be completed. Yinda was very dissatisfied with the battalion commander's cautiousness. In his view, there was no need to spend so much effort on such a deserted city. Caution is the parent of safety. Su Yunxing shook his head. Then, as if he thought of something, he looked up at Yinda and said, Commander Yin, people can have pride, but they can't have arrogance. If you continue to look down on everything like this, I will consider transferring you out of the reconnaissance battalion. Su Yunxing suddenly became serious, and Yinda was really afraid. With his ability, he was more than qualified to be a battalion commander in any regiment. Even if he went to the 3 divisions of the coal front, it wouldn't be a problem for him to be a battalion commander. But the position of the reconnaissance battalion was too important. Any battalion commander who wanted to see the 6th young master would be able to see the young master. So, he would rather be a company commander here than go to another unit. This was because he saw the importance of the reconnaissance battalion. Battalion commander, I was wrong. I'm actually very careful when doing things. Yinda immediately admitted his mistake. In reality, he was a very careful person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have become the company commander of the reconnaissance battalion's 1st company. Naturally, Su Yunxing was someone who understood this principle, so he just reminded the other party. If he was really not satisfied, he wouldn't have reminded him and would have directly transferred him away. With the interlude, just now, when Su Yunxing wanted to do something, Yinda just followed at the side and didn't say anything. The 4 of them walked like this and unknowingly came to a house in the city. Here, they saw an old man resting outside the door. Looking at the old man's appearance, he was in his 50s. At that time, he was already considered a very old man. Haha, old brother, how old are you? Su Yunxing had imprinted almost every corner of the city and every street in his mind. He had basically completed his mission and wanted to take a rest. When he saw the old man, he walked over without thinking and asked in Mongolian. He sat down beside the old man. The old man had already noticed Su Yunxing and the other 3. Seeing them sit down beside him, he wasn't surprised. Instead, he smiled and answered, This old man is 56 this year. Oh, that's still a very old man. Su Yunxing said casually. You can say that. The old man chuckled. His face was filled with reminiscence, and the vicissitudes of life were written all over his face. Seeing that the old man seemed to be reminiscing about something, Su Yunxing didn't disturb him. Instead, he reached into his bosom and took out a piece of dried meat that he always carried with him. He also took out a bottle of old wine from the hands of 2 bodyguards and placed it in front of the old man. If you want to get what you want from others, you have to pay first. This was what Yang Qindong always said. Now, the scouts who were good at gathering information had learned most of it. The wine and meat that was suddenly placed in front of him made the old man, who was originally sitting at the door basking in the sun, stunned. Then, the way he looked at Su Yunxing and the other 3 changed. Allowing the old man to size them up in front of him, Su Yunxing only smiled and didn't say anything. But unexpectedly, the old man suddenly said, Although you are dressed like Mongolians, but if this old man didn't guess wrongly, you should be people of the Ming dynasty and soldiers of the Ming dynasty. Suddenly being exposed, the faces of Yinda and the 2 bodyguards couldn't help but tighten. They even instinctively wanted to pull out their swords to silence the old man. On the other hand, Su Yunxing's expression didn't change, and his heart didn't beat fast. He casually raised his arm and stopped the actions of the 3 bodyguards. He smiled and looked at the old man and asked, But I don't know why old brother thinks so. He. The old man didn't seem to notice the actions of the 3 bodyguards. He casually smiled and said, Only people of the Ming dynasty who understand etiquette would treat guests like this. If you were really Mongolians, you definitely wouldn't be so polite to this old man. So it was because he was too polite that it aroused the suspicion of the other party. Su Yunsheng reflected in his heart. Should the scouts learn to be more domineering when they go out to do things in the future? While his heart was still thinking about this unintentional loophole, the old man spoke again. Although your Mongolian can be considered authentic, but let's talk in Chinese. AI. Speaking of which, I haven't spoken Chinese in a long time. Oh, old brother is also a Han? Su Yunqing's interest was immediately piqued. After all, other than his comrades, to be able to meet a fellow Han here was still very delightful. I can be considered half Han. My father was a Ming Dynasty man. Later on, he met a grassland woman and settled down here, giving birth to me. The old man said somewhat embarrassedly. After all, in that era, if one's blood wasn't pure, then one was a mixed blood. People would look down on them. I see. Su Yunsheng didn't have any intention of looking down on the old man. On the contrary, he was very curious about the old man's behavior in front of him. He had a feeling that this old man had some stories. Old brother, I wonder if you can tell me your name? Name? The old man said meaningfully. Then, he sank into his memories for a while before saying, this old man's Mongolian name is Zhang Shirbao. Han name is Zhang Shirbao. So it's Old Master Zhang. Nice to meet you. Su Yunsheng very politely clasped his fist and didn't mention the old man's Mongolian name. He only said that it was a Han name to express a kind of closeness. Then he said something that shocked Yinda and the two bodyguards behind him. This little one's name is Su Yunsheng. I'm the battalion commander of the mercenary scouts under the Duke of Loyalty. Su Yunsheng actually directly revealed his identity. This was definitely not allowed by the rules of the scouts. Unless it was one of their own, as a scout, he absolutely couldn't reveal his identity. As the battalion commander, it was impossible for Su Yunsheng not to know this. But he still did so. Naturally, Yinda and the two bodyguard were puzzled and puzzled. Chapter 694. Naturally, Su Yunsheng had his own reasons for saying this. First, he found that this old man named Zhang Shirbao was very honest. Otherwise, even if he saw through it, there was no need to say it, because sometimes a wrong word could cost one's life. Secondly, he felt that Zhang Shirbao still had a good impression of him, or rather, of Mingren. Third, even if he made a wrong judgment, he was confident that he could make the other party stay and not let the news of him appearing here spread. Since that was the case, there was no harm in directly revealing his identity. It had to be said that Su Yunsheng's courage was quite big, and this time, he made the right bet. Just after he reported his true identity, Zhang Shirbao changed his unhurried expression and suddenly said with a shocked expression, "The Duke of Loyalty and Courage of the Great Ming Dynasty? Is it the Duke of Loyalty who is known as the God of War and defeated the Great Army?" Zhang Shirbao also knew the name of the God of War. At that time, Yang Qindong had won against many and defeated Yi Xian. Because of this, his name was spread throughout the Mongolian grasslands. It was normal for Zhang Shirbao, who had Han blood, to know about it. Yes, when Su Yunsheng answered this question, he was also very formal, and his expression was very respectful. It was like the officials of the Ming Dynasty were respectful when talking about the emperor. Is it really? The God of War is coming to the grassland? Zhang Shirbao was a little excited. He stretched out his arm and grabbed Su Yunsheng's arm. Yes, the God of War is not only coming to the grassland, but he also wants to build a city here. He wants to change the pattern of war here. He wants to create better living conditions for the Han people here. And Argamaki is his next target. He wants to occupy this place and rebuild it. At that time, you'll be very happy to live here. Su Yunsheng felt that Zhang Shirbao was really excited, so he simply told him about his mission and Yang Qindong's current goal. It seemed to be a secret, but after tonight, everyone would know that Yang Qindong had occupied Argamaki. It was no longer a secret. Su Yunsheng told the truth, which surprised Zhang Shirbao and made him very excited. Good, that's great. After saying good 3 times in a row, Zhang Shirbao's eyes actually held a trace of tears. Obviously, this news really made him very excited. Su Yunsheng was also excited and happy, as if he had been infected. Look, this was what the people wanted. The sixth young master hadn't done anything yet, but his appearance had already made an old man like Zhang Shibao so happy. Once a big city was built here, there would be even more people who would be happy. Once he had the support of the people, what was there to worry about? That's right. With the arrival of the war god, the future of the Han people will be much better. As long as they abide by the law, they will be able to live a better life than before. This should be what everyone wants to see. Su Yunsheng nodded and continued with the idea of praising the sixth young master. Zhang Shibao's eyes lit up when he heard that. Then, he repeated thoughtfully, "Can the Han people really live a good life?" Of course. You don't understand the war god. He has always been merciful to his enemies, but he is very good to the Han people. I'm afraid you still don't know that the former Jiaoji and Lansan kingdoms are now under the rule of the war god. The Han people there received a large amount of land, and their lives are better than before by 100 times. If you have the chance to go there and take a look, you will see that the Han people's faces are filled with all sorts of smiles. That is happiness from the bottom of their hearts. A large amount of land that belongs to them. Zhang Shibao continued to repeat. His eyes revealed a look of yearning. Yinda and the two soldiers saw this and couldn't help but feel happy. This was because they also had a part to play in this matter. Just when the five of them were immersed in the hope of a beautiful future, Zhang Shibao's thoughts suddenly returned to reality. He looked at Su Yunsheng and said, "You guys should be here to act as the vanguard and prepare to occupy this place. Have you guys thought of how to deal with the Mongol cavalry? Also, how can we prevent them from destroying the spring in their desperation?" Su Yunsheng was about to confidently say that it was just 500 unguarded cavalry. Their reconnaissance unit would naturally be able to take them down easily. However, when he suddenly heard about the spring, his face was still filled with shock. Spring? What spring? You guys don't know? Zhang Shibao also looked at Su Yunsheng and the other three with a puzzled expression. I really don't know. Please tell me, Elder Zhang. Su Yunsheng's face was a little red as he lowered his head. Speaking of which, although the reconnaissance unit was powerful, it wasn't as pervasive as the Security Bureau. In addition, Yang Shindong had just given the order to take down Alikamaki, so it was reasonable that he didn't fully understand the situation here. This actually is not a big secret. However, not many people know about it. Alikamaki City, there is a spring here. It is also because of this that the problem of water source is solved. This is also the main reason why the great Ming dynasty chose to build a city here. Otherwise, wouldn't it be too troublesome to transport water from the Wooliga River? There are only about 1,000 people here. There are indeed 500 Tatar cavalrymen guarding this place. In fact, they're guarding this water source. Every half a month or so, the Tatar army will come here with water carts to collect water. The 500 cavalrymen here are prepared for this. From Zhang Shibao's words, Su Yunsheng learned of another big matter. He also knew that tomorrow, the Tatar army would come to collect water. This unexpected news shocked Su Yunsheng. He suddenly felt that he knew too little about this place. Even if it was because this was the first time they came here, even if it was because they hadn't come here the last time the Tatar army came to collect water, these are not the reason. The most fatal reason was that he didn't know enough. His meeting with Zhang Shibao was just a coincidence. However, he unexpectedly received this news, which was enough to make Su Yunsheng feel that this trip was not in vain. If not for this matter, he would have brought the scouts here. It was very likely that he would have given the Tatar cavalry a chance to destroy the water source in the spring. Once they poisoned it, who knew how long it would take for the spring to be digested and for the people to drink it with ease? After Zhang Shibao knew that Su Yunsheng represented the god of war, he told him everything. When it was almost dusk, Su Yunsheng left. Before he left all the food on him as a sign of gratitude and asked Zhang Shibao to keep this a secret. The four of them left Alikamaki as though they were passing by. Because there were only 4 of them, Even if the Tatar cavalry in the city saw them, they didn't pay much attention. This was because, strictly speaking, Alikamaki wasn't under anyone's influence, and no one wanted to forcibly occupy this place. After Su Yunsheng and the other three left Alikamaki, they immediately rushed to the command center. After dinner, they appeared in the headquarters. Su Yunsheng hurriedly went to the command center to meet Yang Qindong. The matter of a spring was also somewhat out of Yang Qindong's expectations. Before this, he didn't receive any relevant information. But now that he knew, it was naturally a good thing. Previously, he was still thinking that once the first city was built, it would be troublesome to obtain water from the Wooliga River. He was even thinking about digging a canal. Now that he knew that there was a spring in the city, and according to Zhang Shibao's words, the spring seemed to be quite big. In the past, when Alikamaki had a population of tens of thousands, it wasn't difficult to supply water. This was equivalent to a gift from the heavens. We must protect the safety of the spring. How about this? Arrange the Wolfang Special Forces to complete this task. Your scouts only need to follow the plan and do what you want. As for the water-fetching team sent by the Tatar army tomorrow, leave it to Tiger's Main's independent regiment. They just changed from infantry to cavalry and can be used to train the troops. Yang Qindong made a decision after thinking for a while. Su Yunsheng quickly left, along with the Wolfang Special Forces led by Tiger's Main. As a military system continued to expand, the strength of the army also continued to increase. The mission of the Wolfang Special Forces had already changed. In Yang Qindong's words, their mission was mainly to carry out beheading operations and special undercover missions. This time, protecting the spring in Alikamaki City belonged to the undercover mission. After receiving the military order, Tiger's Main quietly set off with a group of members. This night for Alikamaki City was no different from any other night. When night fell, the city became quiet as usual. Apart from the 100 cavalrymen who were responsible for the normal night patrol, there was not a sound to be heard. Perhaps it was because no one had any ideas about this place for a long time, or perhaps it was because there was simply no place worth other people's attention. In short, the 100 cavalrymen patrolling would only make a symbolic trip once every 2 hours. Then, they would gather at a lit bonfire in the city to rest their feet. An almost abandoned city, a city without many citizens, a city without many resources, a city without a very good geographical location. If not for the existence of a thick spring, which could still be considered useful, there would not even be 500 cavalrymen. How could such a place have a heavy military force? And how could it be so tightly guarded? Therefore, when Tiger's Main brought a group of Special Forces members into this place, they did not encounter any obstruction at all. They followed the map that Su Yunsheng obtained from Elder Zhang Shibao and rushed to the spring. Chapter 695. The mouth of the spring was located in the middle of a courtyard that was not small. Rather than calling it the mouth of the spring, it would be more accurate to call it a well. Just beside the mouth of the spring, there was a pond in the courtyard. It was already filled with water and looked extremely clear. At night, a bright moon hung upside down in the water, giving people the feeling that they could fish the moon out of the water. Tai Hu and the others came to the high wall beside the small courtyard from all directions. Each of them was like a nimble fox, not making any sound or movement. After they observed closely from the surrounding rooftops, they noticed that there were dozens of breathing sounds coming from the row of houses beside the pond. Some were light, some were heavy, but most of them seemed to have entered a state of sleep. Since Zhang Shibao said that the Tatar cavalry might drug the mouth of the spring and destroy the water quality here, Tai Hu and the others had to be prepared. With a signal, the 20 members divided into different directions and began to divide the work. Some of them continued to monitor with their guns. Some began to enter the small courtyard or the various exits near the mouth of the spring, and some had already jumped off the rooftops and approached the row of houses where the breathing sounds were coming from. Skinny Monkey was the most agile member. He was the first to arrive in front of the houses. Unknowingly, a weapon similar to a modern grenade had appeared in his hand. This was not a normal grenade, but a smoke bomb. Once it was fired, it would release a pungent smell, causing people to lose their ability to judge for a certain period of time and lose more than 70% of their mobility. Skinny Monkey was the first to arrive, followed by King Kong, Violent Ape, and the others. Each of them guarded a door, holding a smoke bomb in their hands. When all of them were in place, they looked at each other, and 6 smoke bombs were suddenly thrown from the windows into the 6 rooms. In the silent night, the smoke bombs made a sound in unison. Oh, huff, ah, choke. About 4 to 5 seconds later, there were bursts of shouts, curses, and screams coming from the houses. These sounds should have been like thunder in the silent night, but the sound of the cavalry charging at the city gate covered everything, so the sounds made here did not attract too much attention from the outside. Even though no one was paying attention, it didn't mean that the members of the special forces would go easy on them. On the contrary, their attacks began at the same time. The smoke grenades emitted a pungent smell, causing the Tatar cavalry to rush out of their rooms. Then, like dumplings, they were knocked out one after another. There were only 6 rooms, but 50 Tatar cavalry rushed out of them. In the end, apart from 2 people who resisted fiercely and suffered light injuries, the other 48 people were knocked out before they could even figure out what had happened. Search! After taking control of the situation, Iron Tiger gave the order. The members of Wolf Fong worked together and quickly found a large amount of poison in the room. Among them, they found a lot of arsenic, nux vomica, and other things. These things melted in water, and after being consumed, they would appear to be poisoned. It was hard to imagine what would have happened if Su Yunxing hadn't found out about it. If the mercenaries didn't know that the water source had been destroyed, what would have happened after the army drank the water? Come, bring the 2 wounded over here and let them drink the water in this pool. Iron Tiger was shocked and a little angry. Looking at the 2 wounded Tatar cavalry, he couldn't help but feel angry. If the 6th young master hadn't said that building the city required too much manpower, he would have killed them. But he could avoid the death penalty, so let them taste the water. If there really was a problem, they could only blame their bad luck. There was no time to poison them, or it could be said that they didn't think that someone would target them, so there was naturally no problem with the water. The 2 Tatar cavalry calmly drank the water. Seeing that everyone was safe, Iron Tiger let out a sigh of relief. He ordered his men to guard this place and not allow anyone to come close without orders. On the streets of Arakamaki, the sounds of killing had already become one. When the appointed time arrived, the cavalry of the reconnaissance unit began their attack. The first to be attacked were the 100 Tatar cavalry responsible for tonight's night watch. They thought that would be an ordinary night like any other. But no one expected that the enemy would suddenly appear. While they were still far away, the sound of arrows piercing through the air could be heard. Most of the Tatar cavalry didn't even have time to react before they were injured. A few of the cavalry reacted faster. They had just mounted their horses when they were surrounded by at least 3 or 4 scouts. After a round of wild attacks, they were injured and fell off their horses. Yenda was responsible for leading a company of scouts to deal with the sleeping Tatar cavalry. Even though Yenda only had 100 soldiers under him, they had attacked suddenly, taking advantage of the element of surprise. By the time Yenda launched his attack, most of the enemies were unarmed. The result of this battle was naturally easy for Yenda to take down the enemy easily. This battle really wasn't worth writing about. The enemy's strength was weak. If they were strong soldiers, they wouldn't have been assigned to guard a meaningless city. It was another surprise attack. From the beginning to the end of the battle, less than an hour had passed. Of the 500 Tatar cavalrymen, only 4 were killed because of their fierce resistance, and 30 were lightly injured in the resistance. The rest were all alive. Arakamaki had changed hands at this moment. A shining signal flare rose into the sky. Yang Qindong, who was waiting in the distance, led the main army to move towards Arakamaki. From today onwards, the first city that was under construction would become their headquarters in the north. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front Division didn't go with the main army to the future fur city. Instead, after a good night's rest, the army suddenly retreated east the next morning, heading towards the newer Gondusi region. They had a new mission to open up a new logistical supply line. If anyone dared to threaten them on this road, they would end up dead under their spears and swords. Arikamaki had changed hands. The delay in the news and the fact that none of the 500 Tatar cavalry had a chance to escape caused this news to be completely sealed and not spread. Outside the city, the Tatar team sent out to pull water appeared. At that time, the grassland was still very rich in water plants. There was no environmental pollution, and because of the small population, it was not wantonly exploited. In fact, there was no shortage of water sources. It was just that the spring water in Arikamaki City was better and more delicious. Therefore, some Tatar nobles were still very used to drinking the water here, and there was a matter of fetching water once every half a month. Not only was the water quality of the spring good, but the amount of water was also sufficient. No one knew where it was connected to, but it gave people a feeling of inexhaustible. Every time, the caravan that came to fetch water became very large. Looking at the place where the independent regiment was lying in ambush, the number of caravans was more than 200. It could be said to be majestic like a long dragon. Wow, what a huge team. Using binoculars, Tiger Mane saw the approaching caravan from afar and sighed. At the same time, his eyes were shining. He was afraid that there would not be many people coming. If that was the case, there would be no meaning in fighting. Reporting to Commander, the scouts report that the enemy has a total of 200 carriages, 5,000 civilians, and about 1,000 cavalry. Deputy Commander Xian Honghai lowered his voice and came to Tiger Mane's side to report. Xian Honghai, the deputy commander of the independent regiment, was from Chichen City. He had been an auxiliary soldier, cold front squad leader, platoon leader, and company commander. Later, because of his courage and calmness, he was chosen by Yang Qindong and transferred to the independent regiment to assist Tiger Mane in his daily work. Because of Tiger Mane's multiple identities when he was not around, Xian Honghai was mainly responsible for the regiment's work. Only 1,000 cavalry. Tiger Mane, who was originally eager to give it a try, was like a deflated balloon. His fighting spirit was reduced by half in an instant. He originally thought that it would be the enemy cavalry, but he did not expect that there would be 5,000 civilians. In this way, this battle really did not have much of a start. If they were not evenly matched, it would not show the strength of the independent regiment, right? This was the difference between mercenaries and other armies. Other people were afraid that the opponent was too strong and would be dangerous when fighting. However, when it came to mercenaries, they despised the opponent for being too one-sided. It would not be satisfying to fight, and it would not show their strength. With only 1,000 cavalry opponents, Tiger Mane felt dispirited. When he looked at Xian Honghai, who was unusually excited, he decided to do him a favor. All right, Deputy Commander Xian, the command of this battle will be handed over to you. But remember, the 5,000 civilians cannot be hurt. Young Master wants to build Sure City, so he needs a lot of manpower. These are all good laborers. Understood. Please rest assured, Commander. Xian Honghai patted his chest and said with a face full of assurance. Then, he turned around and left, as if he was afraid that Tiger Mane would change his mind if he stayed any longer. Tiger Mane was Yang Qindong's subordinate, so naturally, he did not have to worry about being promoted. Xian Honghai had relied on his own hard work and ability to get to where he was today. Although he was only in his early 20s and could be considered a relatively young deputy commander, since he was born in the cold front, the world in his heart was much bigger than that of ordinary people. His dreams were also much broader. After receiving the military order, Xian Honghai immediately called over the 10 battalion commanders who had just been reorganized from infantry to cavalry. Commander has already handed the battle mission to me. Now, I order each battalion to send out 100 cavalrymen to attack the enemy's cavalry with me. The other cavalrymen will be responsible for guarding the 5,000 civilians pulling the water wheel. Since the enemy only had 1,000 cavalrymen, In order to train the ability of his subordinates, he naturally would not send out too many cavalrymen. Only when the number of soldiers was equal could it be a form of training. A battalion had 400 people, but only 100 of them could go out. This made the 10 battalion commanders somewhat unhappy. 2 of the young and energetic battalion commanders clamored that they would send out their own battalion to ensure that they could deal with the enemy's 1,000 cavalrymen. Chapter 696. It was naturally a good thing for the officers to have strong confidence. However, this wasn't the time to flaunt their heroism. How could Xi and Hong Hai agree to this? With one sentence, if anyone dared to speak out of turn, even the mission of 100 men would be canceled. Sure enough, the battalion commanders became well-behaved. So be it. It was better than not sending anyone. The battalion commanders followed Xi and Hong Hai's instructions with the idea of training their fighting spirit through actual combat. They picked out a group of 100 men with average strength and gathered a total of 1,000 men to hand over to the deputy commander. What was worth mentioning was that the officer leading each battalion was actually a battalion commander, and all of them held official positions. Xi and Hong Hai naturally noticed this scene, but he didn't say anything. The officers below also wanted to go on the battlefield and kill the enemy. He naturally couldn't refuse. After all, wasn't he also leading the troops? The caravan in the distance was getting closer and closer. It could already be seen that the 5,000 men driving the caravan were all dejected and dispirited. Even the 1,000 cavalrymen were walking sparsely. There wasn't the slightest bit of vigilance and formation that a cavalry troop should have. Although it could be said that the grasslands were currently in chaos, there was war everywhere. Many people were still fine when they left home in the morning, but who knew if this would be the last time they left home? However, in the face of danger, no one would have the idea of taking the water caravan. It was simply too worthless. It was too much of a loss to pay the price for these things. Even the common people knew that they shouldn't do things that were unprofitable, let alone a cavalry troop. Therefore, when the independent regiment suddenly appeared and Xi and Hong Hai led 1,000 cavalrymen to kill from the side, the 1,000 Tatar cavalrymen looked at them as if they hadn't woken up from a dream. They looked at them as if they were looking at an idiot. It was as if they were saying, "Are you kidding me? We're just a caravan. You want to steal from us?" Enemy attack. Enemy attack. The leading Tatar Chiliarch only stared blankly for a moment before he reacted. He then pulled out his saber and shouted loudly. He intended to summon the morale of the army back in the shortest time possible. Kill. At this moment, Xi and Hong Hai and his 1,000 cavalrymen were already less than 150 meters away from the Tatar cavalrymen. As the general leading the team, he shouted as he took out his bow and shot an arrow at the nearest target. He didn't use a flintlock because Xi and Hong Hai didn't think it was necessary. Since they were cavalrymen, archery was still the best choice for long-range weapons. This was also a form of training for the troops. Following Xi and Hong Hai's arrow, the countless independent cavalry around him also knocked their bows and shot forward. Dozens of Tatar cavalrymen had nowhere to hide and were hit by the arrows and fell from their horses. However, even more of the Tatar cavalry managed to escape with the speed of their horses. At the same time, they began to shoot arrows, threatening and killing the opposing cavalry. The cavalry of the independent regiment was made up of the original auxiliary soldiers and the captive soldiers of the Ming army of Newer Gandusi. Among them, it wasn't that they didn't have horse riding skills in the past. They were just ordinary soldiers who hadn't undergone strict training. For an army like this, even if they were given healthy horses, it would still be difficult for them to display the true advantage of cavalry. Because of this, the weakness of the independent regiment was revealed when they shot arrows. Facing the Tatar cavalrymen who grew up on horseback, both sides shot at each other. After a short while, the unprepared Tatar cavalryman began to gain the upper hand. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw his own soldiers being shot by arrows or falling off their horses. In a short period of time, about 100 people were injured or died in battle. Xian Honghai clenched his teeth in heartache. He finally realized that his cavalry was still lacking in many aspects. No, we can't go on like this. A voice sounded in his mind. Xian Honghai was very clear about the strength of his cavalry. Most of them were like ducks being forced to perch on a perch. They lacked the time to break in with their horses and the time to train on horseback, especially when it came to archery. Whether it was shooting moving targets or moving arrows, they were still very weak. It was expected that cavalry would be at a disadvantage when shooting at each other. Rome wasn't built in a day. Powerful military combat ability wasn't something that could be trained in a single battle. In order to reduce losses, the soldiers had to have more opportunities to train and survive. Xian Honghai made a decision. He shouted loudly, "All battalion commanders, charge with me! Close combat!" With Xian Honghai as the leader, he brought 10 battle-hardened battalion commanders to close in on the Tatar cavalrymen from all directions. Under their lead, more and more soldiers stopped taking out their bows and followed behind the officer. They dodged the arrows and closed in on the enemy cavalrymen. Tiger's Mane was looking at everything that was happening in the distance through his binoculars. His expression was stern. When the 6th young master said that he wanted to give this mission to them to train and strengthen the ability of the independent regiment to fight on horseback, he was still a little unconvinced. Previously, their independent regiment had used infantry to defeat cavalry at the short stone pile. Now that they were cavalry, how could they not defeat cavalry? Reality gave Tiger's Mane a big slap in the face. Only now did he understand that their previous victory was only due to the power of the Type 81 assault rifle. When they gave up on using firearms, their independent regiment was nothing. Commander, the situation with Vice Commander Xian is not good. Should we send the cavalry battalion? Another cavalry battalion commander of the independent regiment asked worriedly. The independent regiment had 10 cavalry battalions that were reorganized from infantry. Apart from them, there were 6 other cavalry regiments. In comparison, these 6 cavalry regiments were much stronger. Although they couldn't compare to the Nusan cavalry, they had the advantage of numbers. Dealing with 1,000 Tatar cavalrymen wasn't a problem. Clenching his right fist, Tiger's Mane was a little tempted. His breathing became a little heavier. But after a while, he exhaled and said, "No need. An army has to go through hardships and risks in the end. If they're always under protection, this kind of army will never be strong." Tiger's Mane didn't order the main force to go out and help. This was because he knew that an army that hadn't undergone a transformation wasn't a strong army. It was also because he believed in his vice commander, Xian Honghai. He believed that he would be able to obtain the final victory. Not letting Tiger's Mane down, Xian Honghai really did give up on long-range attacks when he discovered that the situation wasn't good. He changed to close combat. He relied on the incomparably sharp saber in his hand to shorten the gap between the two sides. When Xian Honghai brought his 10 battalion commanders to the front of the Tatar cavalry, the saber in his hand continuously swung down. The enemy's cavalry formation that had just gathered was scattered. The advantage of archery was suppressed. Taking advantage of this opportunity, more and more of the independent regiment's cavalry rushed over. The situation began to turn in their favor. The soldiers of the independent regiment couldn't be more familiar with the saber training. When they didn't have war horses, one of the things they had to do every day was to hack their saber 1,000 times a day. Because of this, countless soldiers' right arms swelled up. Some even fainted on the training ground. Their hard work finally paid off. Under the supervision and urging of their commander, Tiger's Mane, Vice Commander Xian Honghai, and other officers, the soldiers swung their sabers quickly and powerfully. Now that they had changed to close combat, their hard work finally paid off. Ding ding dang dang. The sound of metal colliding rang out. Weapons collided with weapons, and the two sides that were previously suppressed entered stalemate. This stalemate didn't last long. As the sabers continued to collide, cracks began to appear on the sabers of the Tatar cavalry. The quality of the weapons became the biggest factor that affected the outcome of the battle. Finally, after 7 or 8 clashes, the sabers in the hands of the Tatar cavalry began to break more and more. Both sides were riding horses, both were cavalry, and both sides were moving at the same speed. One side had weapons, while the other side only had a broken saber that couldn't threaten the life of the other side. The result was already predetermined. Retreat. Seeing the sabers in their hands break one after another, the arrogant Tatar cavalry's expression changed greatly. They turned around and fled. They had already seen 200 water carts and 5,000 civilians being controlled by the enemy. Knowing that the difference in numbers was too great, they finally decided to retreat. They had to inform the generals of this news. The Tatar cavalry fled. They used horse riding skills that were more skillful than the independent regiment's cavalry to escape. All that was left for Exionhonghai and the others were the horses' tails and the backs of the Tatar cavalry. Although the Tatar cavalry fled and the independent regiment seemed to have won, when the final statistics were tallied, they discovered that they had lost more than 100 soldiers and more than 300 were injured. However, the number of enemy cavalry that remained was less than 200. This was the first time since the establishment of the mercenary regiment that they had such a ratio of battle results and casualties. Of course, this was the first time that the results were the worst. Because of this, Exionhonghai brought 10 battalion commanders and more than 800 cavalrymen, who were either injured or uninjured, to the commander of Tiger Brilliance and asked for forgiveness. You don't need to ask for forgiveness from me. You should ask for forgiveness from the more than 100 comrades that have already died. With the same number of soldiers, you suddenly killed your way out and took the initiative. However, the battle was actually so tragic. You can conclude it yourselves. Tiger's man said with a cold face. After saying this, he brought the 200 water carts and the 5,000 civilians that he had just captured and headed to the beginning city. As the commander of the independent regiment, he had to bear the main responsibility for today's battle. He had to personally ask for forgiveness in front of the 6th young master. Aramadki had been officially renamed as the beginning city by Yang Chendong. After the name change, the city seemed to be glowing with youth. The city was bustling with activity. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.